Chapter 407. Bang! Bufang took out the gigantic body of the supreme mantis prawn from the system's dimensional storage. The moment this gigantic creature appeared, it almost filled the entire kitchen. The dragon bone kitchen knife appeared and cut the gigantic mantis prawn into pieces. Bufang took out one of the pieces and placed the rest into the system's dimensional storage. Patting the body that was the size of a millstone, Bufang nodded in satisfaction. This mantis prawn was, after all, a supreme sea spirit beast. Even though it was already dead, the spirit energy within its body was still vigorous and abundant. Bufang first washed the body of the mantis prawn with clean water. After making sure that not even a speck of dust could be seen, Bufang spread the sauce that he had prepared on the meat. Then, true energy swirled around it and continuously patted the shell of the prawn meat. As true energy flowed into the shell became soft. Black energy swirled around and the black turtle constellation wok appeared. Bufang took a step back and spat out a mouthful of golden flames. The flames burned fiercely and entered the bottom of the wok. In just a short while, the bottom of the wok became extremely hot. Bufang poured the melted water from the extreme ice grounds into the wok and set up a huge bamboo steamer basket. Then, he placed the processed supreme mantis prawn meat into the steamer basket. Gurgle. As the steam rose, the melted water in the wok began to boil rapidly. Steam surged up and continuously poured into the steamer basket. This caused the supreme mantis prawn meat to undergo a beautiful transformation that was almost undetectable. While Bufang was happily cooking in the kitchen, the situation outside the Light Wind Imperial City was exceptionally grave. The people of the Light Wind Imperial City stood proudly on top of the city walls. Their faces were extremely grave as they looked at the metallic warship floating in the sky. The dreadful pressure emitted from the warship made the people on top of the city walls feel stifled. Duan Yun came out of his elixir store and quickly saw the metallic warship floating in the sky. His pupils immediately shrank. Isn't this the warship of the Grand Baron's sect? Why would he appear here? Duan Yun gasped, his face pale. The Grand Baron's sect wasn't a small, nameless force in the hidden dragon continent. Instead, it was a powerful first-rate force with countless experts. The powerful ones were even terrifying existences that stood at the peak of the hidden dragon continent. It was one of the strongest first-rate forces apart from the hidden dragon royal court. This force was incomparably bloodthirsty. Wherever the warship passed, the people would suffer. The number of second-rate and third-rate forces that were destroyed by the warship was innumerable. Duan Yun was originally an expert from the alchemy sect, so he shouldn't have been afraid of the Grand Baron sect. However, he was currently in the Light Wind Empire. What if the warship was blind and destroyed him along with it? He didn't have time to cry. Why did the Grand Baron sect's battleship come to the Light Wind Empire? Was it because of the 10,000 bestial flames that Owner Bu had? Duan Yun's eyes narrowed as if he had thought of something. Who dares to act so presumptuously above my Light Wind Empire? Ji Qingxue was brimming with confidence. With the support of Owner Bu's Rampage Ramen, the overall strength of the Empire had risen to another level. Perhaps the top forces of the Empire were slightly weaker than the other forces, but the middle forces of the Empire weren't any weaker than any of the forces in the southern region. With strength, one would have confidence. Hence, Ji Qingxue stood proudly on the city wall, displaying the dignity that the ruler of the Empire should have. The father and son, Xiao Meng and Xiao Yu, were the strongest forces of the Empire. They stood proudly on the city wall. Xiao Meng had broken through to the 8th grade war god level. His true energy surged like thunder. His foundation was extremely solid. Compared to the disciples of the big sects, he didn't have any cultivation resources. The reason why he could reach his current realm was because he had painstakingly cultivated step by step on the battlefield. Hence, Xiao Meng's mind was incomparably firm, even if the pressure from the warship made his heart palpitate. Xiao Yu carried a sword on his back and looked down. As a swordsman, his foundation was unquestionable. Rumble! The warship rumbled. Then, a mocking laughter rang out from the warship, as expected of the unruly people of the training ground. Do you know what you are facing now? Who gave you the confidence to be so arrogant in front of the warship of my Grand Baron sect? A lazy voice filled with mockery and playfulness came from the warship. It was like thunder rolling in the sky above the imperial city. In the store, Bufang looked outside the kitchen in astonishment. However, he didn't care about it. His mind turned again and landed on the steamer basket in front of him. Rays of auspicious clouds seemed to surge out from the steamer basket. There was also a rich spirit energy and an aroma that made people salivate. Bufang smacked his lips. He was a little impatient. The pupils of Ji Qingxue and the others on the city wall shrank. Then, they saw a figure burst out from the warship and stood in the sky. A terrifying aura was released from the figure. It was actually a Supreme Being expert. This was one of the few remaining Supreme Being disciples of the Grand Baron sect. Although he was injured in the battle with the White Cloud Villa, he didn't care about the ants below him. There wasn't even a Supreme Being expert. What was there for him to fear? At the front of the warship, Liang Kai didn't personally take action. There was no need for him to do anything. A native empire of the training ground didn't have the qualifications to make him take action. One Grand Baron sect disciple was enough to deal with it. He just needed to watch the show from the warship. The Grand Baron sect had defeated many sects in the Hidden Dragon continent. How could a small country in the training ground dare to disobey its supreme prestige? Those who disobeyed deserved to be exterminated. Ants! The Grand Baron sect Supreme Being disciple laughed disdainfully. Xiaomeng's eyes became serious. This was a Supreme Being expert with a powerful aura. However, Xiaomeng wasn't afraid. With a flash of light in his hand, he took out a steaming bowl of rampage ramen from his spatial spirit tool. The soup of the ramen was rosy and emitted steam. Xiaomeng, with a solemn expression, started to gobble down the noodles without saying a word. The bowl of rampage ramen was finished in 2 mouthfuls. This strange scene dumbfounded the Grand Baron sect Supreme Being expert. He wasn't the only one. Even Liang Kai, who was watching from the warship with a mocking expression, was startled. Then, the corners of his mouth curled into a smile as he looked at Xiaomeng as if he was looking at an idiot. Do you plan to eat a full meal before you die? You are merely an 8th-grade war god. Do you think you can defeat a Supreme Being just by eating a bowl of noodles? If it was an elixir, then it would be more plausible. But eating noodles before a battle? What kind of fetish was this? Clang! After eating the noodles, Xiaomeng suddenly felt as if there was a raging energy boiling within his body. His eyes seemed to be burning with flames. The porcelain bowl was ruthlessly thrown to the ground by him, shattering into pieces. At this moment, Xiaomeng felt as if his entire body was brimming with energy, as if he had become invincible. Looking at the Grand Baron sect Supreme Being expert, he let out a long roar and stomped his foot on the ground. The entire city wall trembled, emitting a dull thud. Xiaomeng charged forward, his sword heading straight for the Grand Baron sect Supreme Being. As the sword light flickered, a violent wave of true energy gushed forth. Looking at Xiaomeng, who was charging forward, Xiao Yu also took out a bowl of steaming hot rampage ramen. After gulping it down in 2 mouthfuls, his aura abruptly soared. As a swordsman, his sword intent was extremely ferocious. A swordsman was one of the most valiant occupations. A beam of sword light seemed as if it was about to tear apart the sky. It shot out from behind Xiaomeng. The Grand Baron sect Supreme Being sneered in disdain. An 8th-grade war god and a 7th-grade battle saint. Merely 2 ants, yet they dared to fight against a Supreme Being? Then both of you should die. He let out a long roar. His body seemed to be wreathed in flames, and his fists seemed to be wreathed in scorching flames. Boom, boom, boom! As his fists pounded down, the flames on his fists immediately turned into two fire dragons, smashing toward Xiao Meng and Xiao Yu. In his opinion, with his Supreme Being methods, he could definitely crush these two ants. On the warship, he, who was originally watching this scene with amusement, suddenly let out a cry of surprise. The aura of these two people has soared by several times. Why is it so strange? It's a little like they ate an explosive yuan pill. Could it be that these two fellows mixed the explosive yuan pill into their ramen? No. If that's the case, wouldn't it be better if they just ate the elixir directly? What's the point of doing this? Xiao Meng and the Supreme Being immediately collided, and the battle erupted in an instant. Waves of true energy surged forth. Explosions resounded unceasingly. Xiao Meng, who was an 8th grade war god, was actually on par with the Supreme Being. Within the store's kitchen, the multicolored light became increasingly intense, and finally, it slowly faded away. Bufang delightedly opened the steamer basket. Immediately, the supreme mantis prawn meat was completely steamed. A rich fragrance wafted out from it, and a faint radiance flowed out. Indistinctly, one could see a 7-colored luster. The dragon bone kitchen knife appeared, and Bufang lightly pried open the shell of the prawn, revealing the white and tender prawn meat within. The dense steam and fragrance wafting out from it were intoxicating. Grabbing the steamed mantis prawn meat, Bufang took a bite. As the scalding and springy prawn meat entered his stomach, Bufang's eyes widened, and he was so satisfied that he couldn't close his mouth. Grabbing the mantis prawn, Bufang walked out of the kitchen, eating as he walked to the entrance. Ouyang Xiaoi, Xiao Xiaolong, and the other customers of the store were already crowding at the entrance, watching the battle on the city wall. While they were watching with rapt attention, they smelled a rich fragrance. The fragrance seemed to contain the fishy saltiness of the sea, and they couldn't help but raise their eyebrows. With an odd expression, they looked at Owner Bu, who was gnawing on a millstone-sized prawn meat. They didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Slurp slurp. Someone came to the imperial city to make trouble again? Bufang said as he chewed on the prawn meat, looking at Xiao Meng, who was happily eating the rampage ramen and fighting with the Supreme Being in the sky. Xiao Meng's foundation wasn't bad. Otherwise, a bowl of rampage ramen wouldn't have allowed him to fight with the Supreme Being. The better one's foundation was, the higher their battle prowess would be after eating the rampage ramen. Rip! The Grand Baron Sek's Supreme Being, who was getting more and more frightened as the battle went on, felt a little irritated. He was unexpectedly entangled by an 8th grade war god. All of a sudden, he was startled, and he felt a chill coming from behind him. Then, a beam of sword light instantly shot out, as if it was tearing through the darkness, and slashed at his original wound. Fresh blood instantly splattered. Xiao Meng seized the opportunity, and a powerful sword strike smashed into the Supreme Being's body. The Supreme Being was seriously injured, and he fell from the sky, landing on the ground. Xiao Meng held his sword with one hand, and his imposing manner soared as he stared at the warship. Xiao Yu, on the other hand, rubbed his sword and quietly stood there. The imposing manner of this father and son pair was like a rainbow, and their will to fight was surging. Ji Qingxue clenched his fist, and his face was filled with excitement. The Light Wind Empire finally had the battle prowess to defeat a Supreme Being. Liang Kai leaned on the railing of the warship and looked down with narrowed eyes. The corners of his mouth slowly curled into a playful smile. Chapter 408. A bowl of ramen allowed an 8th grade war god to fight against a Supreme Being. Moreover, he was able to defeat the Supreme Being and defeat him. Although it was largely due to the fact that the Supreme Being expert had sustained serious injuries, it was undeniable that the increase in battle prowess was abnormal. The sovereign expert flipped himself up from the rubble on the ground. His entire body was in an extremely sorry state. There was a huge wound on his chest that had been slashed by a sword. Fresh blood flowed out continuously from the wound, and a thick smell of blood pervaded the air. The blood of a supreme being was very active. Therefore, the smell of blood permeated the air, causing the surrounding area to be filled with a pungent smell. However, when the people of the Light Wind Imperial City smelled the smell, their bodies couldn't help but tremble. They were excited, because the Light Wind Imperial City finally had an expert who could fight against a supreme being expert. Although he relied on external forces, so what? As long as he could fight against a supreme being expert, external forces were nothing. Liang Kai pinched the railing of the warship. He squinted his eyes as he looked at Xiao Meng and Xiao Yu, who were standing proudly in the air below the warship. Even if an 8th grade war god took an 8th grade essence burst pill, it would still be difficult for him to fight against a supreme being expert. This was because a supreme being was much stronger than an 8th grade war god. However, a scene that surprised him appeared in front of him. Was his Grand Baron Sek's disciple too weak? No. Absolutely not. Although the cultivation method practiced by the Grand Baron Sek's disciple wasn't the best, it was still several times more superior than the cultivation methods practiced in this remote area. However, even so, their supreme being disciple was still defeated. Although this disciple wasn't as strong as Bei Gongming, there was no doubt that there was something strange about this. The only thing he could think of was the bowl of steaming hot ramen. Who would eat a bowl of ramen before a battle? Liang Kai wasn't a fool. He knew that there was definitely something fishy about that bowl of ramen. This kind of ramen seemed to be quite awesome. Bei Gongming, go down and fight with these two ants. Let them know the dignity of our Grand Baron Sek. Liang Kai playfully curled up his lips and said to Bei Gongming, who was behind him. Bei Gongming's body stiffened and his eyes narrowed. He looked at Liang Kai coldly. As if sensing Bei Gongming's gaze, Liang Kai slowly turned around as a look of disdain appeared on his handsome face. Don't tell me that you can't even deal with two ants. No matter what, you are still an existence that could compete with me, Liang Kai. Anger flashed in Bei Gongming's eyes. With a cold snort, he stomped his foot and shot out of the warship. A terrifying aura rolled out from his body. That's right, Bei Gongming was an inner court disciple of the Grand Baron sect, and he had once competed with Liang Kai. Although Liang Kai had left him far behind, this didn't hide the fact that he was powerful. He was indeed very powerful. Even though he was only at the middle stage of the Supreme Being realm, his battle prowess was close to that of a peak Supreme Being. Sigh. Forget it, you should stay on the warship. Just as Bei Gongming was about to charge out of the warship, Liang Kai's lazy voice suddenly sounded. Bei Gongming's eyes widened as he felt an enormous pressure descend from the heavens and ruthlessly smash into his body. Bang! With a loud bang, Bei Gongming's entire body was sprawled on the ground, as if he had fallen flat on his face. His nose was smashed by the tremendous force, causing blood to spurt out. Liang Kai! Bei Gongming was enraged, and the anger that he had been suppressing in his chest burst forth. He crawled up from the ground and roared ferociously as he charged toward Liang Kai. Ha ha! You are just an ant! I am the Grand Baron Sek's pride of heaven, an existence that you will always look up to. Liang Kai laughed loudly as he casually waved his hand. The power of heaven and earth seemed to solidify the surroundings. Bei Gongming's body froze on the spot, and so did his ferocious expression. Scalding blood dripped down from his nose. Liang Kai flicked his finger. A powerful force bounced off Bei Gongming's body, sending him flying backward. He fell heavily on the deck of the warship. Looking at Bei Gongming, who was like a pile of mud, Liang Kai sneered. Bei Gongming, who had competed with him on the arena in the past, was full of mettle. But now, he was lying in front of Liang Kai like a dead dog. That comfortable feeling made Liang Kai feel as if all the pores on his body were opening up. He no longer paid any attention to Bei Gongming, who was lying on the ground like a dead dog. Liang Kai's body floated up into the air, and he slowly walked out of the warship. Xiao Meng and Xiao Yu were naturally unaware of what had happened on the warship. Their gazes were locked onto Liang Kai's body. They knew that this fellow was the warship's owner, or rather, the person with the highest status on the warship. Without a doubt, this person's cultivation level was extremely terrifying, and he could be in existence at the peak of supreme being. Just like that dreadful Shura sect demon from the last time. However, there was no fear in Xiao Meng's heart at this moment, only a burning desire to fight. With a wave of his hand, he took out a bowl of steaming hot rampage ramen from his spatial spirit tool. The rosy broth of the ramen splattered everywhere, and its fragrance permeated the air. In order to increase his fighting strength to its peak, Xiao Meng prepared another bowl. The feeling of controlling his fighting strength was truly intoxicating. However, just as he was about to gorge himself on the ramen, he felt his whole body stiffen. However, he felt his entire body stiffen, and he was unable to move. It was as if he had been bound by a terrifying power, and he could not even make the action of eating ramen. What was going on? Xiao Meng's eyes widened as he looked at Liang Kai, whose face was filled with smiles. Liang Kai floated in the air with ease, casually stepping on the ground. His hair fluttered in the wind, making his handsome face look even more handsome. This ramen is the reason why your fighting strength increased. Interesting. Liang Kai calmly said. Then, he raised his fair palm, and with a wave of his hand, the rampage ramen in Xiao Meng's hand flew uncontrollably toward him. Xiao Meng was shocked. What kind of strength was this? He couldn't even move, and could casually take away the thing in his hand? Was this a supreme being? How could a supreme being be so powerful? Xiao Meng's heart violently thumped. Would the rampage ramen be effective against a supreme being? Xiao Meng didn't know, but if it was effective, the consequences would be unimaginable. Rip! A sword light suddenly tore through the sky, as if it was tearing apart a ray of white light in the pitch-black night sky. The floating ramen was instantly torn into two halves by the sword light. The rosy broth exploded in the sky, sprinkling down. The sparkling and chewy ramen scattered in all directions. How dare you! The smile on Liang Kai's face instantly disappeared. His gaze turned, and with anger, he stared at Xiao Yu, who was in the distance, cutting the ramen into pieces. Xiao Yu held his longsword, his handsome face expressionless. When his gaze met Liang Kai's, there wasn't even the slightest bit of fear. This was a swordsman, a fearless and courageous swordsman. He was courting death. Liang Kai sneered, and his figure suddenly disappeared into the void. In the next instant, he reappeared in front of Xiao Yu. Xiao Meng and Xiao Yu's pupils shrank. Too fast. This person's speed was really too fast. Bang! A punch, a simple punch, smashed out, directly smashing toward Xiao Yu. Xiao Yu raised his longsword, intending to block this punch. However, with a single punch, the longsword was shattered into pieces. It was directly smashed into smithereens by the punch. Puff! A mouthful of blood spurted out, and Xiao Yu felt as if his whole body was about to be torn apart. His mind went blank, and he directly fainted. His body fell from the sky, like a cannonball, smashing into the ground. A loud bang resounded, and smoke and dust billowed. Xiao Meng's eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and he roared. The sword light shot out. After eating the ramen, he burst out with the combat strength of a supreme being. This sword contained all of his essence, energy, and spirit. This sword must kill this damned guy in front of him. Supreme being? So what if he was a supreme being? An 8th grade war god can actually burst out with this kind of combat strength. It's really miraculous. If I could have this kind of explosive power, I would definitely not be at the bottom of the ranking tournament of Heavenly Sons. I must obtain this kind of skill. Liang Kai's eyes revealed a trace of greed. However, Xiao Meng's attack did not pose any threat to him. He casually shot out a palm. Xiao Meng's sword, which was condensed with a monstrous fighting spirit, was smashed into pieces. The sword was broken, and Xiao Meng was sent flying, spitting out blood. Liang Kai raised his palm, and the true energy in the void turned into a big palm. With a loud bang, it grabbed Xiao Meng, whose whole body was exhausted, and threw him into the warship. He needed to know the reason for Xiao Meng's explosive power, so he captured Xiao Meng. Could it be that ramen? It was definitely that ramen. He needed to know more about that ramen. With a bang, Xiao Meng powerlessly fell on the deck of the warship, spitting out blood. His whole body's cultivation seemed to be sealed. How is this possible? Is a supreme being really that strong? Xiao Meng was dazed. Cough, cough. He is no longer a supreme being. A weak voice, accompanied by intense breathing, resounded. Bei Gongming looked at Xiao Meng, who was lying on the ground, and said bitterly while gasping for breath. Xiao Meng was dumbfounded. No longer a supreme being? That was above. Supreme being? On top of the Light Wind Empire's city wall, everyone was dumbfounded. Ji Qingshue's face stiffened. How could this be? After eating the rampage ramen, Xiao Meng's combat strength reached the level of a supreme being. How could he be captured so easily? Ji Qingshue's body was on the verge of collapse. The Light Wind Empire finally had an existence that could fight against a supreme being. However, it still could not change anything. Liang Kai's long robe fluttered in the wind. His body floated above the city wall as he looked down at the despondent Ji Qingxue. The corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a sinister smile. You are the emperor of this empire. I originally wanted to get some fire and leave, but now, I've changed my mind. I plan to leave after eating the ramen. You can choose to tell me where to eat the ramen, or... Liang Kai smiled warmly. Or die. Chapter 409. Some of the weaker ones directly coughed up blood and fainted. His red eyes turned purple in an instant. The pressure on his body surged even more. With a loud explosion, the entire ground cracked open, as if it was being torn apart by a huge force. The fragrant mantis shrimp meat carried the fishy and salty taste unique to sea spirit beasts. However, this fishy saltiness carried a hint of sweetness. The unique taste made Bufang more and more excited as he ate. On the warship, Xiao Meng supported his body and slowly climbed up from the ice-cold deck. Despair gradually emerged in his eyes. He believed that a level 8 aborigine, under his pressure, would definitely be lying on the ground, unable to move. His face would be trembling with fear, and he would be lowly and humble. Ji Qingshue's whole body slammed into the city wall, spitting out a mouthful of blood. In just a moment, Liang Kai arrived in front of the store. After his mood improved, Bufang shot a glance at Liang Kai and said, "Yes." When Ji Qingxue regained consciousness, the face in front of him that seemed to be smiling yet not smiling gradually became clearer. Only then did Ji Qingxue realize what had happened. Xiao Bai spat out a cold word concisely. His figure dashed out like a gust of wind. Bufang's face was expressionless as he looked at Liang Kai with indifferent eyes. His words were really rude. Ouyang Xiaoyi, who was hiding behind Bufang, instantly exploded. Liang Kai looked at Bufang and said each word in disdain. Bufang ate the supreme mantis shrimp, calmly looking at Liang Kai standing in front of him. Humph! An emperor of a mere training ground actually dares to hide from this young master. The pressure of a divine physique echelon expert burst out from his body. The terrifying pressure changed the color of the wind and clouds. Even though Bufang's heart was as calm as an ancient well, he couldn't help but feel a flame burning in his heart. He took a deep breath. However, before she could rush out, Bufang pressed down on her head and pushed her back. A figure shot out from the kitchen at lightning speed. 100 crystals was really not considered expensive. On top of the city wall, a sharp gaze was directed in the direction of the store. A punch was aimed at Liang Kai's handsome face. Kill! Xiao Bai's punch did not shake Liang Kai in the slightest. But soon, Liang Kai saw Bufang. Bufang was munching on the freshly steamed supreme mantis prawn meat. Give me a bowl, Liang Kai said with a smile. He wanted to fight with his life on the line. However, before he could move, he was stopped by the Grand Baron Sek's disciples on the warship. The cultivation of these Grand Baron Sek's disciples was not weak, which made Xiao Meng rather fearful. On the city walls, many experts of the empire couldn't help kneeling on the ground from the pressure. Their faces were pale. Zhang Xian's eyes narrowed and his mind trembled. He felt that this was inconceivable. When Xiao Bai's powerful punch was about to land, Liang Kai raised his palm. A strong gust of wind howled in that instant. He was in a good mood as he ate to his heart's content. A thought emerged in his mind, which was to beat the guy in front of him into a pig's head. Liang Kai was startled. He did not expect that the ant-like guy in front of him would actually say such words. Looking at the expressionless Bufang, Liang Kai narrowed his eyes. Liang Kai wanted to see if this trashy country bumpkin, who was merely an 8th-grade war god, would still look at him with such arrogance. Suddenly, an invisible wave spread out in all directions within the store. That bag of crystals flew toward Bufang. Ji Qingxue only felt a stab of pain in his eyes. Then, the world began to spin, and his mind became a little confused. A series of crisp sounds rang out as the crushed rocks were shattered by the frightening power. They turned into powder and scattered. He wanted to see the scene of Bufang crawling and trembling under his pressure. What did you do to me? Ji Qingxue's heart shrank. Shouldn't that ant be lying on the ground, trembling? Xiao Xiaolong and the others involuntarily retreated into the store. Ouyang Xiaoi hid behind Bufang, looking at this handsome but extremely terrifying guy with fear. Interesting. Liang Kai slowly stepped on the air. Every step he took was like a giant rock pressing on the hearts of Ji Qingxue and the others, causing them to involuntarily retreat with pale faces. Do you plan to leave after eating a bowl of noodles? No matter how much pressure he released, the guy in front of him still stood upright, looking at him as if he was an idiot. He was not the slightest bit affected by his pressure. Even a supreme being couldn't withstand this pressure, yet it couldn't deal with an 8th-grade country bumpkin. The cultivation level of this expert who stepped down from the metal warship was too terrifying. Bufang said seriously. This was the first time someone dared to tease him like this. Bufang didn't answer him immediately. Instead, he took a bite of the sparkling mantis shrimp meat in his hand, which seemed to be flowing with fluorescent light. However, Liang Kai's expression didn't change in the slightest. He was extremely calm and even revealed a hint of playfulness. This girl's hot temper was simply intolerable. Tell me, where did you get this ramen? Liang Kai asked with incomparable gentleness. However, this price for a bowl of ramen was somewhat strange. Liang Kai's hair fluttered in the wind as he glared at Bufang. Liang Kai's words lingered in Ji Qingxue's ears, causing him to be slightly dumbfounded. Soon, he realized that Liang Kai had taken a fancy to Owner Bu's Rampage Ramen. Liang Kai looked at Bufang, the corners of his mouth curling up as he said this. Ji Qingxue's expression was unsightly. Under Liang Kai's gradually increasing pressure, the muscles all over his body couldn't help but tremble, and his chest felt stuffy. Liang Kai raised his eyebrows. A bowl of ramen for 100 crystals. He really hadn't seen it before. That ramen that can increase one's fighting strength was made by you? Thump. This Rampage Ramen could instantly increase an 8th-grade war god's fighting strength by so much, to the point where he could fight on par with a supreme being. This powerful existence couldn't help but be tempted. I suddenly remembered, why did I give you crystals? What right do you have to take my crystals? When I tell you to do it, you just do it. Do you have the guts to take my crystals? With a flick of his sleeves, he sent Ji Qingxue flying. A strong gust of wind blew against Liang Kai's face, causing his hair to flutter. An existence above the supreme being level. He didn't expect the guy in front of him to be an existence above the supreme being level. What kind of realm was that? Xiao Meng was bewildered. Therefore, the imperial city's populace was dumbfounded. They looked at Liang Kai, who was floating in the air, in a panic. "You're quite courageous," Bufang said seriously as he looked at Liang Kai. Waves of air dispersed. Bufang looked back at him indifferently. Their gazes collided in the void, and there was no sound or trace of them. Bufang grabbed the mantis prawn meat with one hand and reached out to take the crystals. However, just as he reached out his hand, his complexion changed. In the process of speeding, the purple color turned into a cold gray. What the hell was with that guy standing so straight? Within the imperial city, all the populace were dumbfounded. However, the guy who easily defeated General Xiao Meng obtained the Rampage Ramen. Once his fighting strength was enhanced like Xiao Meng's, it would be an extremely frightening matter. However, he really has some guts. Liang Kai sneered. He actually admired Bufang, which was rare. This was because he discovered that the crystal that Liang Kai had tossed over was suddenly sucked in by a huge force in the void and flew back to Liang Kai's hand. A loud bang resounded. Liang Kai found his target and couldn't be bothered with Ji Qingshu anymore. He lightly tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and his figure gracefully swayed. He landed on the ground and leisurely walked toward the store. Liang Kai lightly smiled. Liang Kai landed beside Ji Qingshu and lightly patted his shoulder. His gaze gradually shifted toward the bottom of the city walls. The direction he was looking at was precisely where Fong Fong's little store was located. He raised his huge fist and stomped on the ground, shattering the rocks beneath his feet. A tyrannical fluctuation rumbled out. Was that the store that the emperor mentioned after he was hypnotized by Nie Tian? When they saw General Xiao Meng ruthlessly defeating the enemy, they were so excited that they couldn't help but cheer. However, not long after, General Xiao Meng was sent flying onto the warship with a slap from the enemy. The opponent's strength had reached a level that made Ji Qingshue's heart tremble. Buzz, the surrounding rubble began to flutter in the air, as if it was lifted by an invisible force into the void. "You're the second person to speak to me like this. That guy from back then. Now he's lying on the warship like a dead dog, looking up at me. You're just an ant in the training ground. Where did you get the courage to speak to me like this?" Liang Kai was so angry that he started laughing. Let's see if this guy can still act so pretentiously after his head is swollen. 100 crystals for a bowl. Then, he took a bite of the supreme mantis prawn meat in his hand. With a wave of his hand, he placed the half-eaten piece of meat into the system's dimensional storage. He was no match for the enemy at all. The difference between them was too great. With a wave of his hand, a bag of crystals appeared in his hand. Liang Kai looked at Bufang and lightly tossed it into the air. Liang Kai smiled. He had found his target. This was the pressure of a 10th grade Divine Realm expert. Even a Supreme Being expert would be like an ant in the face of this pressure, and have to bend his waist. It was as if his entire being had fallen into a state of chaos, and was in a trance. Liang Kai smiled as he looked at Ji Qingshu. That gentle smile, in Ji Qingshu's eyes, became extremely sinister. Bufang furrowed his brows. Liang Kai gave a faint smile. The smile on Liang Kai's face gradually disappeared. He glanced at Ji Qingshu and sneered. Chapter 410. A gust of wind spread out imperceptibly. Xiao Bai threw out a punch, but it was easily blocked by Liang Kai's raised palm. Bufang stood behind Xiao Bai, his face expressionless. Xiao Bai's gray eyes constantly flickered. Ever since he had swallowed the departed soul orb, Xiao Bai's fighting prowess had increased to the peak of Supreme Being, or even half a step into the divine echelon. However, Liang Kai wasn't half a step into the divine echelon. He was a true divine physique echelon warrior. Xiao Bai's powerful punch was easily blocked by his opponent. Puppet? Someone from the Magnolia sect? No. This thing is too different from the puppets of the Magnolia sect. It doesn't seem like the style of the Magnolia sect. Liang Kai looked at Xiao Bai, his brows slightly furrowed as he muttered in confusion. He had seen the puppets of the Magnolia sect before. Every 5 years, the Hidden Dragon Royal Court would hold a competition in the Hidden Dragon continent. In that competition, talented youths from various forces on the continent would participate. In that competition, Liang Kai had encountered an expert from the Magnolia sect. Therefore, he was very familiar with the puppets of the Magnolia sect. Boom! A majestic power surged out from Liang Kai's body. Xiao Bai was instantly pushed away by this force. With a clanging sound, the metal wings on Xiao Bai's back spread out, as if they had transformed into the wings of a giant bird. In an instant they covered the sky. Those wings were like the sharpest blades, emitting an ice-cold metallic glow. With a whistling sound, Xiao Bai flapped his metal wings and turned into numerous sharp flying daggers, dashing toward Liang Kai. The scene of the flying daggers covering the sky was indeed very shocking. If an ordinary person were to face such a scene, he would have been so frightened that he couldn't even stand steadily. However, Liang Kai was very calm, because he was not an ordinary person. As a proud son of heaven of the Grand Baron sect, he had seen all kinds of storms and waves. He raised his palm, and suddenly, a strange fluctuation spread out. The tens of thousands of flying daggers, those flying daggers that were slashing toward him, were all absorbed into his palm. They gathered in his palm and formed a huge ball. To be honest, your puppet's combat power is not bad. Unfortunately, it's still lacking. Liang Kai glanced at Bufang and said sarcastically. Then, he suddenly clenched his fist, and the metal flying knives scattered. Xiao Bai's body was also sent flying by his palm. Without this puppet, what other tricks do you have? Liang Kai said to Bufang with a smile that was not a smile. Bufang's face was expressionless as he stood there calmly. According to the previous situation, this pretentious guy would have been slapped to death by Xiao He. However, after Blackie returned from the illusory spirit swamp, it fell into a deep slumber and showed no signs of waking up. Therefore, Blackie could not be counted on. Bufang suddenly felt a little excited. His gaze gradually sharpened. In the distance, Xiao Bai, who had been sent flying, crawled up. The gray light in his eyes became even colder. His feet stomped on the ground, and his body shot out like an arrow. Get down, Boom! Liang Kai looked at Bufang with a faint smile as he slowly walked over. As he walked, he casually waved his hand, and Xiao Bai, who was about to rush over, was once again pressed to the ground. Crushed stones flew everywhere. This guy was really strong. Everyone in the store felt a chill in their hearts. Xiao Bai was already strong. Even a supreme being would be stripped and thrown out in front of Xiao Bai. However, in front of this handsome man, Xiao Bai was suppressed to the point where he couldn't even fight back. What about Blackie? Everyone knew the store's background. Shouldn't Blackie appear at this time? Compared to Xiao Bai, Blackie was even more terrifying. Back then, even the terrifying Shura sect overlord was killed by Blackie with one slap. Blackie should be able to deal with this guy in front of them. Ouyang Xiaoi, Xiao Xiaolong, and the others didn't have much to worry about. With Blackie around, the store was as stable as Mount Tai. Tap, tap, tap. Liang Kai walked in front of Bufang. The two were less than a meter apart. At this distance, even the pores on each other's face could be clearly seen. Bufang looked at Liang Kai indifferently. Liang Kai looked at Bufang with a faint smile. Their gazes collided in the air. However, from Liang Kai's gaze, Bufang saw only disdain. Indeed, a 10th-grade Divine Realm warrior had the right to be disdainful when facing an 8th-grade war god. However, this disdainful gaze made Bufang feel very uncomfortable. With a single thought, a wisp of black smoke curled around Bufang's palm. A black turtle constellation walk appeared. Grasped by Bufang, he fiercely smashed it toward Liang Kai. The distance between the two was too close. The speed at which Bufang smashed the walk was extremely fast, beyond imagination. Liang Kai didn't expect that the ant in front of him would dare to attack him. Therefore, he didn't expect the black wok to smash toward him. Bang! He hastily retaliated, his fist colliding with the black wok. The tremendous force from the black wok forced Liang Kai to close his eyes. What a heavy wok! Liang Kai took a small step back. His hair fluttered in the strong wind caused by the black wok. However, he only took a small step back. The black wok surprised him, but it didn't smash him to death. He slapped the black wok with his palm, sending it flying backward. Bufang held the black wok and retreated a few steps. His face became serious. This guy was really strong. He must be a divine physique echelon existence that broke through the shackles of a supreme being. Bufang relied on the black wok. With his current cultivation of 8th grade war god, he could knock out some supreme being warriors without a problem. However, it was unrealistic to knock out a divine physique echelon existence. Once one entered the divine physique echelon, he transcended the mortal body. It was far from what a supreme being could compare with. After stabilizing his body, Bufang's face was very serious. But amidst the seriousness, there was also a hint of excitement. Swoosh! The black turtle constellation wok flew up. From the system-dimensional bag, melted water from the land of extreme frost poured down. Bufang's face suddenly flushed red. Then, he actually spat out a mouthful of golden flame. The flame floated to the bottom of the black turtle constellation wok and burned fiercely, emitting a scorching heat. In an instant, the water in the wok began to boil. In the past few days, Bufang had made no less than a few hundred bowls of rampage ramen. He was already very familiar with the properties of this ramen. Now that he was cooking it, he could finish a bowl in a few breaths. The ramen that had already been pulled was pulled out by him. It was like a piece of silk being boiled in water. Swoosh! With a shake of his shoulder, Xiaopi, who was sleeping soundly on his stomach, did a 360-degree somersault and fell into the wok. Golden specks of light emitted from his body and gradually melted into the noodles. The abyssal chili sauce was dipped into the wok. A bowl of piping hot rampage ramen was cooked on the spot. Liang Kai, who was watching from afar, was dumbfounded. However, after being dumbfounded for a while, his eyes suddenly brightened and flickered with a dazzling radiance. 10,000 bestial flames. So the 10,000 bestial flames were with you. Are you the native who obtained the 10,000 bestial flames? It really didn't take me any effort to get it? Liang Kai was exhilarated. He didn't expect that the one who cooked the ramen and the one who obtained the 10,000 bestial flames were the same person. This saved him a lot of trouble. He wanted to find the person who obtained the 10,000 bestial flames after obtaining the ramen. However, now that all of them were together, he was a little excited. After Bufang finished cooking the rampage ramen, he planned to stuff it into his mouth. Liang Kai squinted his eyes and raised his palm. He wanted to control Bufang the same way he controlled Xiao Meng and snatched the rampage ramen. However, he suddenly realized that his pressure had no effect on Bufang. Slurp! Under Liang Kai's watchful eyes, Bufang finished the entire bowl of ramen with a slurping sound. He even drank the soup cleanly. Liang Kai raised his palm, feeling a little embarrassed. However, he wasn't worried at all. He thought that the person who obtained the 10,000 bestial flames would be strong. Maybe he was also a divine physique echelon warrior. However, it seemed that his worries were unfounded. The 10,000 bestial flames was his. Even if the ramen could enhance one's strength, could it really enhance an 8th grade war god to the divine physique echelon? That was impossible. The divine physique echelon was a completely different realm from the supreme being realm. Without breaking through the shackles of the supreme being realm, one could never reach it. After finishing the rampage ramen, Bufang burped. His complexion immediately became rosy. He squinted his eyes and felt a strange heat surging through his body. Was Bufang's foundation solid? That was without a doubt. Every time he broke through, he achieved a breakthrough by completing the system's turnover. Every breakthrough was perfect, reaching the pinnacle of the realm. Therefore, if one were to say who had the most solid foundation, it would be Bufang. Of course, the others didn't know this. As for Bufang himself, he wasn't sure either. The true energy cyclone in his dantian spun fiercely. The golden 10,000 bestial flames floating within it became more intense, as if it was about to set a prairie ablaze. Bufang opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of air. Dense, boiling true energy gushed out. Liang Kai opened his mouth in surprise. Why did this kid suddenly become so weird? Suddenly, Bufang made his move. For the first time, Bufang took the initiative to attack. His hair, which was tied up with a velvet rope, suddenly loosened and fluttered in the air. With a burst of speed, Bufang dashed toward Liang Kai like a bolt of lightning. With a light pat, the black turtle constellation walk spun and flew toward Liang Kai. At this moment, everyone was dumbfounded. Whether it was Ouyang Xiaoi, Xiao Xiaolong or Ji Qingxue and the others on the city wall, they were all dumbfounded. Their faces were filled with disbelief. What did they just see? They actually saw Owner Bu fight? This was the first time they saw Owner Bu fight. No one expected that Owner Bu, who usually kept a low profile, would take the initiative to attack when facing a strong enemy. Where was Blackie? They were puzzled, but then they thought of something that chilled their hearts. Could it be that Blackie had left? Without Blackie, Owner Bu had to do it himself? But the enemy was a 10th grade divine warrior. Could Owner Bu really defeat him? Liang Kai looked at the approaching footsteps and sneered coldly. Since you want to die, then die. I will extract the 10,000 bestial flames from your corpse, bit by bit. Chapter 411. The fact that Owner Bu had personally charged toward the enemy surprised many people. In many people's minds, Owner Bu had always been an expressionless and calm existence. Occasionally, he would curl up in his chair and lazily bask in the sun. He didn't seem like the kind of person who would take the initiative to attack. Moreover, Owner Bu's cultivation was only at the 8th grade war god level. How could he be a match for a 10th grade divine echelon expert? Liang Kai didn't care about what the others thought. His gaze toward Bufang gradually became ice-cold, and the corners of his mouth curled into a chilling smile that made one's hair stand on end. On the 2nd floor of the store, Blackie was snoring away. It was in a deep sleep and didn't show any signs of waking up. Bufang was well aware of this. After the plump dog ate the mysterious substance in the crystal mine, it had been in a deep sleep, as if it had been drugged. Therefore, Bufang didn't count on Blackie anymore. After eating a bowl of rampage ramen, Bufang attacked with all his might. The spinning black turtle constellation walk flew toward Liang Kai at high speed, tearing through the air. Liang Kai raised his palm and revealed a cold and disdainful smile. He clenched his palm into a fist and punched the black turtle constellation walk. A muffled thud echoed. Liang Kai looked at the black turtle constellation walk in astonishment. A feeling of heaviness, like that of a towering mountain, came from the walk. It made him feel as though he had punched a huge mountain. However, Liang Kai was Liang Kai after all. As a divine physique echelon expert, his physical body was extremely tough. Although the black turtle constellation walk was heavy, it didn't send him flying. Bufang stomped on the ground, and waves of energy surged toward him. It was as if a gale had been whipped up, blowing away the crushed rocks. The ground cracked evenly. Bufang jumped up expressionlessly, and the true energy in his body surged. After eating a bowl of rampage ramen, Bufang felt as if his whole body was burning. His true energy was boiling, and its intensity wasn't any weaker than the true energy of a supreme being. Liang Kai blocked the black turtle constellation walk, but Bufang, who had leaped into the air, slammed his palm down. With a thought, the black turtle constellation walk suddenly became huge, swallowing Liang Kai in an instant. As Bufang's palm slammed down, Liang Kai's pupils shrank. he was directly crushed by the black turtle constellation Walk, which had become enormous. Boom, boom, boom. The weight of the black turtle constellation Walk was very light to Bufang. Therefore, even though the black turtle constellation Walk was enlarged, Bufang was still able to rub it against the ground. The huge tremor created a deep ditch on the ground. Smoke and dust billowed. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air, dumbfounded. This was especially so for Ji Qingxue, who was standing on the city wall. His mouth was agape and his face was blank. He did not know what to say. Owner Bu's combat power was actually so strong? He had always thought that the reason why the store was strong was because of Xiao Bai's iron puppet and Blackie, the mysterious black dog. However, they did not expect that Owner Bu, who had always kept a low profile, was also unparalleled in combat. To be able to rub a divine physique echelon expert against the ground, this was something that they did not dare to imagine. It was too exciting. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Bufang, who was pressing down on the black turtle constellation Walk, suddenly furrowed his brows. The ground began to shake violently. There seemed to be waves of heat rolling up. Bufang felt that under the black turtle constellation Walk, there was a huge force supporting the Walk. Rumble, gravel fell. The black turtle constellation Walk was slowly lifted up, gradually leaving the ground and floating in the air. Under the black turtle constellation Walk, Liang Kai's jet-black hair fluttered in the wind. His eyes seemed to be burning with flames. His body swelled up, and the veins on his arms were densely covered. The huge force actually lifted the black turtle constellation Walk. Bufang's heart shuddered. Then, he patted the black turtle constellation Walk, and his figure floated up. The black turtle constellation Walk also shrank under his will, suddenly turning into a black light and returning to his hand. Without the black turtle constellation Walk suppression, Liang Kai's aura suddenly spread out. It was incomparably huge. His figure shot up to the sky like a lightning bolt, shooting toward Bufang. "You're just a mere native ant. How dare you attack this young master?" Liang Kai's face was ashen. He was actually pressed down on the ground by an 8th-grade ant. If word of this got out, would he still have the face to call himself the Grand Baron Sek's Son of Heaven? As a Son of Heaven, he naturally had to crush everything and fear nothing. Even among those of the same level, he had to be invincible, let alone against an 8th-grade ant. With a whistling sound, Liang Kai's figure appeared in front of Bufang. His face was ashen and ugly, and his killing intent was surging. Bufang took a deep breath and smashed the black turtle constellation Walk again. But this time, Liang Kai didn't dodge at all. His whole body swelled up, and there seemed to be a scorching sun appearing between his brows, blooming with extreme brilliance. Bloody lines suddenly spread from between Liang Kai's brows, covering his whole body. One punch. The black turtle constellation Walk was directly smashed back to Bufang's side. Bufang was directly smashed to the ground by the huge force. You should feel lucky. An 8th-grade ant actually got to see this young master's scorching sun demonic physique. You should be content to die under this young master's scorching sun demonic physique. Liang Kai's expression became somewhat ferocious. Suddenly, with a swoosh, a sonic boom resounded. He suddenly appeared in front of Bufang. With a bang, he didn't even raise his hand. The natural force from his body pushed Bufang far away, causing him to fall to the ground. Buzz! Bufang had just gotten up when Liang Kai appeared. A huge fist smashed down. The black turtle constellation Walk was raised, instinctively blocking. With a bang, Bufang was once again smashed away. After activating the scorching sun demonic physique, Liang Kai's strength became extremely strong, and his battle prowess became even more terrifying. Bufang could only be crushed. Even though Bufang had eaten the rampage ramen, it was even more difficult to fight against a 10th-grade divine warrior, especially one of the top geniuses of the divine realm. He was beaten to the point where he couldn't even fight back. The crowd was silent. Owner Bu was after all an 8th grade war god, and the gap between him and a 10th grade divine was too great. He couldn't create a miracle after all. Bang bang bang! Bu Fong was completely abused by Liang Kai. He had just stood up when Liang Kai appeared, and with a punch Bu Fong was sent flying, or with a palm, he pressed Bu Fong to the ground. The difference in realm made it impossible for Bu Fong to resist. Moreover, Bu Fong had never cultivated any battle techniques, so he didn't have the slightest ability to fight back. Continuous sonic booms resounded. Liang Kai's speed easily broke through the sound barrier, making it impossible for others to catch his movements. Bu Fong stood up. His clothes were somewhat torn, and he wiped away the trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth. His heart was filled with rage. It was the first time he was beaten to the point of spitting blood. There was an indescribable rage burning in his heart. His eyes became cold and detached, looking at Liang Kai, who was moving at high speed like a phantom. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife appeared in his hand, and true energy poured into it. The golden dragon bone kitchen knife suddenly glowed with a golden radiance, turning into a huge machete on his shoulder. His eyes rolled, as if he had caught Liang Kai's movements. The kitchen knife swept out, and sharp knife energy permeated the air, directly chopping toward Liang Kai. A clanging sound rang out. Liang Kai's eyes were cold, and true energy surged in his hand. He actually grabbed the golden dragon bone kitchen knife, pressed it down, and stared coldly at Bu Fong. Do you only have these tricks up your sleeves? With these tricks, you dare to shout that you want to kill me? Who gave you the courage? Liang Kai opened his mouth and said coldly. With every sentence he spoke, his body became hotter, and the blazing sun between his brows emitted majestic heat waves. Toward the end, Bu Fong felt as if he was facing a blazing sun. Liang Kai's entire body was golden, dazzling and scorching. Bu Fong looked at him indifferently, his face cold. Liang Kai was indeed strong, and Bu Fong had to admit it. He was much stronger than the Shura sect's overlord. My tricks, you won't be able to guess them, Bu Fong answered indifferently. Liang Kai, whose body had turned into a golden radiance, seemed to let out a cold laugh. A guy at the end of his rope was still so unyielding. What right did he have to be unyielding? Tricks? What other tricks do you have? The 10,000 bestial flames? Too bad you don't know how to use the 10,000 bestial flames. If you gave me this heaven and earth obsidian flame, my scorching sun demonic physique would reach perfection. But if I gave it to you, it can only be used for cooking. What a waste of God's gift. Liang Kai gnashed his teeth in hatred. Bu Fong frowned, looking at the dazzling Liang Kai. What do you know? Cooking with the 10,000 bestial flames is the right way, Bu Fong said. In the next moment, he opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of golden flames. A terrifying temperature emerged at this moment. When Bu Fong spat out the golden flames, the golden mantis shrimp that had been lying on his shoulder slowly raised its head. Its dainty sickle claws waved slightly, and its eyes rolled. Exerting force on its tiny legs, it leaped out from Bu Fong's shoulder. It was as fast as a golden lightning bolt, piercing through the void in an instant. Liang Kai's eyes were blinded by Bu Fong's 10,000 bestial flames. When he opened his eyes again, he saw a golden light gradually enlarging in front of his eyes. What the hell is this? Liang Kai's heart palpitated. Poochie! Bright red blood spurted out from Liang Kai's abdomen. Liang Kai howled miserably as his whole body was smashed into the distance by a tremendous force, crashing onto the ground. The golden light on his body dimmed, and the gaping hole in his abdomen was bleeding profusely. Damn it! Damn it! Liang Kai struggled to crawl up from the ground, his face ugly to the extreme. His aura was weak, and even his scorching sun demonic physique couldn't hold on much longer. He lifted his head and looked over. The culprit that had pierced through his body was lying on Bu Fong's shoulder, dainty and dainty. He was a divine physique echelon cultivator of the Grand Baron sect, yet his abdomen was pierced by a mantis shrimp? Murderous aura billowed. At this moment, Liang Kai's murderous aura was so dense that it almost materialized. Bufang held the black turtle constellation walk with one hand, and the melted water from the extreme ice grounds boiled within. With a flick of his mind, the ramen rolled out and plunged into the water. 9 porcelain bowls floated up and hovered around his body. Bufang took a deep breath, his face solemn. He boiled the ramen in the wok and poured it into the bowls. Wisps of spirit energy and steam surged up, and the 9 bowls of rampage ramen were cooked. An invisible force burst forth from the 9 bowls of ramen that were floating around him. Liang Kai's murderous aura overflowed. A golden spear appeared in his hand, and with an ice-cold murderous intent, it was aimed at Bufang. Bufang, wrapped in the 9 bowls of ramen, was shaken. "I told you, you won't be able to guess my methods." Bufang looked over, the corners of his mouth twitching. The gourmet array suddenly formed in the void. Chapter 412. Rumble. A series of rumbling sounds resounded, and terrifying airwaves reverberated in the surroundings. Everyone held their breaths, their eyes wide open as they watched the battle between Owner Bu and the divine state expert. They did not even dare to breathe loudly. The battle prowess displayed by Owner Bu had already shocked many of them. They never knew that the Owner Bu, who liked to laze around in his chair and bask in the sun, had such a formidable battle prowess. Bufang stood proudly in the sky. Around him, bowls of steaming rampage ramen floated in the air. From within the rampage ramen, there was a surge of spirit energy. The spirit energy seemed to be connected by a unique force of energy, entangling together like strands of silk. 9 bowls of rampage ramen? Owner Bu was going to eat 9 bowls of ramen in one go? Everyone's expression became a little strange. They did not even think about arrays. This was normal. After all, as long as one was not stupid, they would not associate gourmet food with arrays. Liang Kai was not stupid, so he had no idea what Bufang was trying to do. His abdomen was pierced through by the golden mantis shrimp, causing a lot of blood to flow out. Although the wound was healed by the scorching sun demonic physique, his vitality was still greatly damaged. It was difficult to maintain the scorching sun demonic physique. After all, to maintain the scorching sun demonic physique required a large amount of energy and true energy. Taking a deep breath, the blazing sun pattern between his brows shone brightly. Liang Kai's scorching sun demonic physique disappeared, and so did the dazzling golden light that surrounded his body. However, the golden spear in his hand was still shining brightly. Rip! As the spear pierced out, the air vibrated, as if it was about to be torn apart. A rumble resounded in the sky. Liang Kai's figure shot toward Bufang, the spear thrusting downwards with boiling killing intent. "Why did you bring out 9 bowls of ramen? Are you trying to scare me away?" Liang Kai said coldly. He wasn't a fool. If this kind of ramen could be stacked with energy, wouldn't it be even more terrifying? If it could really be stacked, then Bufang would have eaten 7 or 8 bowls at the beginning of the battle. He wouldn't have waited until now to bluff. Bufang used his will to control the 9 bowls of rampage ramen, and his mind calmed down. To be honest, he still didn't have the ability to fully activate the gourmet array. At best, he could only link the spiritual energy in 6 bowls of ramen together. But to link the spiritual energy of the 9 bowls of ramen together, he really didn't have much confidence. But Bufang had no other means. He had to stake everything on this one throw. Otherwise, he would not have the slightest chance of defeating Liang Kai. After all, the gap between the two of them was too big. Of course, there was another possibility. That little black would suddenly wake up. Then, everything would be fine. Although that fat dog Little Black was a little gluttonous, its combat strength was indeed amazing. He might even be able to kill Liang Kai with a single slap. But Little Black was in a deep sleep, and Bufang didn't know when the fat dog would wake up. So, he couldn't pin his hopes on Little Black. Therefore, the gourmet array was his last resort. Forcing himself in the pinnacle realm was probably the fastest way to grow. Liang Kai's spear was already thrusting toward Bufang, but his array still hadn't taken shape. Shrimpy, who was lying on Bufang's shoulder, rolled its eyes and suddenly shot out. Its body, which seemed to be made of gold, flickered with light. It seemed to have transformed into a golden bolt of lightning as it shot forward once again. Liang Kai's eyes widened at this moment, and his breathing became heavy and intense. He raised his palm, and true energy surged, binding Xiaopi, who was rushing toward him, in the air. "You little thing, still want to trick me? I was tricked by a mantis shrimp once, and now you want to do it again?" Whoosh! Dense streams of vital energy emerged from Liang Kai's palms, as if they had turned into chains that clashed with each other. These chains of true energy intertwined, binding Xiaopi. Xiaopi's compound eyes widened, and its sickle-like claws waved constantly, trying to break free. But the more it struggled, the tighter the chains of true energy bound it. In the end, Xiaopi was bound into a ball by the chains of true energy, falling from the air and rolling on the ground for a while. Xiaopi blinked and fell to the ground, unable to move. His body was bound by true energy, and he could only blink his eyes. Liang Kai snorted coldly. It was just a mantis shrimp, and it dared to trick him a second time. Did it really think that he was a fool? In the air, an invisible wave suddenly spread out. Liang Kai felt an inexplicable fear in his heart. Looking up, he saw that the 9 bowls of ramen floating around Bufang had become a little blurry. What was going on? Liang Kai was shocked. He took a deep breath, and his body suddenly tore through the air, leaving a series of sonic booms in the air. Then, he charged toward Bufang. The tip of the golden spear seemed to be twisting true energy, turning into a huge cyclone that spun and crushed toward Bufang. Bufang closed his eyes, and his mind settled on the 9 bowls of rampage ramen around him. True energy seeped out from his body like strands, entangling with the bowls of ramen. When the 8th bowl of ramen was connected, Bufang's complexion suddenly turned pale. He felt as if all the true energy in his body had been sucked clean in an instant. The true energy of an 8th-grade war god was sucked dry in an instant. This magic array consumed so much true energy, and he had only connected 8 bowls of ramen. Liang Kai's murderous intent surged rapidly. That murderous intent made all the pores on Bufang's body constrict, and goosebumps appeared on his skin. Faster! He had to be faster. Bufang continuously took out steaming oyster pancakes from the system's dimensional storage. Oyster pancakes could restore true energy. Although the rate of recovery was not fast, it was at least recovering. While stuffing oyster pancakes into his mouth, Bufang closed his eyes, and his mind was trying hard to connect with the 9th bowl of rampage ramen. Once the 9th bowl of rampage ramen's spirit energy was connected, the gourmet array would be successfully constructed. And this would be the foundation for him to defeat Liang Kai. The crowd raised their heads to look at the sky. Witnessing the strange scene, they did not dare to breathe loudly. 9 bowls of fragrant, steaming ramen floated around Owner Boo's body, while he was stuffing oyster pancakes into his mouth and chewing them at a rapid pace. His appearance was somewhat comical and bizarre. "Stop pretending to be mysterious. Go to hell. I will extract the 10,000 bestial flames from your corpse, bit by bit." Liang Kai's eyes suddenly widened and he roared. His spear, which was shining with a golden radiance, spun and thrust forward. The air shattered and a series of rumbles resounded. On the ground, the sturdy mantis shrimp, which was bound by the true energy chain, rolled its compound eyes, and a faint crunching sound could be heard. It was actually gnawing on the true energy chain. However, it would still take some time to finish gnawing on it. "Kill!" With a loud bang, thousands of flying knives suddenly surged out from the ground, shooting toward Liang Kai. Xiao Bai flipped out from the ruins, his ash-gray eyes flickering. The metal wings on his back flapped, and he soared into the sky, his huge fist smashing toward Liang Kai. He wanted to stop Liang Kai. However, Liang Kai did not care about Xiao Bai at all. How could a supreme being puppet stop him? He swung the long spear. It tore through the void, and the tip of the spear changed direction, stabbing toward Xiao Bai in an instant. Swoosh! The indestructible Xiao Bai was actually pierced through at this moment. Boom! A loud explosion resounded. Xiao Bai fell on the ground. His body was pierced through, leaving a big hole. Light blue electric arcs were crackling inside. Xiao Bai's ash-gray eyes gradually dimmed, unable to move. Bufang's heart skipped a beat. His eyes slightly opened. He happened to see the scene of Xiao Bai being pierced through and falling on the ground. Bufang's heart, which was as calm as an ancient well, suddenly began to boil, as if a raging storm was set off. A flame of anger was burning fiercely. The last spirit energy link was completed with a loud bang. Swoosh! Bufang spurted a mouthful of blood in the void. The 9 bowls of rampage ramen seemed to have formed a mysterious path around his body. It slowly rotated and protected his body. Bufang fell on the ground, creating a deep pit. Because he had overdrawn his true energy, Bufang felt his body was so heavy, as if he was carrying a 1,000-pound boulder on his back. However, he was a little excited in his heart. The gourmet arrays was finally set up. There seemed to be a lot of knowledge about this gourmet array appearing in his mind. Bufang carefully read it. Liang Kai also wielded his spear and hammered down from the sky. His surging killing intent was so thick that it almost shattered the rocks on the ground. Bufang exhaled, slowly standing up from the ground. Among the 9 bowls of ramen, white spots of light floated up, quickly forming a circular array pattern above his head. That pattern was incomparably profound, but it emitted rays of light, making Bufang feel as if his entire body was filled with power. He lifted his head, looking at Liang Kai with an expressionless face. Liang Kai's eyes shrank, his heart pounding. What happened? Why did this kid's eyes make him feel scared? No. He was just an ant-like 8th-grade warrior. One spear was enough to kill him. Go to hell. A beam of golden light fell from the sky, its target. Bufang. Bufang looked at that beam of golden light, the corners of his mouth twitching. Then, he snapped his fingers. Buzz, a strange fluctuation spread out. After the magic array above Bufang's head trembled for a while, it suddenly expanded. In an instant, it enveloped the entire light-wind imperial city within it. The 9 bowls of ramen floated in 9 different corners of the imperial city, turning into 9 beams of light that shot up to the sky. Bufang stood in the center of the array, raising his hand. Thud! The array seemed to shake. Liang Kai's eyes shrank. He was slammed to the ground by a huge force from the sky. Bufang took a step forward, floating in the air. The black turtle constellation Wak spun in his hand, releasing terrifying fluctuations. Bufang glanced at Xiao Bai, who was lying in the distance, crackling with electric arcs. His eyes were filled with anger. The black turtle constellation Wak turned into a dazzling gold, like the cry of a black tortoise. It smashed down from the sky. Liang Kai's heart trembled. With a roar, the scorching sun demonic physique burst forth. Flames burned as he thrust out his long spear, ready to take on the black turtle constellation Wak. But there was an explosion. The black turtle constellation Wak covered everything, swallowing the roaring Liang Kai, smashing into the ground. Chapter 413. The spirit energy of the 9 bowls of ramen was connected by Bufang. However, Bufang became a lot more dispirited because of this. The 9th spirit energy chain had somewhat exceeded his current level of cultivation. He had even forced himself to the point that his eyes were bloodshot. Only then did he manage to connect the spirit energy chain with his mental energy, completing the final formation of the magic array. The gourmet magic array was also formed. The magic array was formed, but Bufang's mental energy was extremely exhausted. He felt his head heavy and drowsy. This was a sign that his mental energy was overused. Bufang's mental energy was strong. Because he often used true energy to cook, his mental energy was much higher than his realm. His cultivation level was only at the 8th grade war god level, but his mental energy could reach the realm of half a step into the divine realm. However, it was too strenuous to arrange the gourmet magic array with the mental energy of half a step into the divine realm. Fortunately, in the end, Bufang completed the magic array. The gourmet magic array expanded and enveloped the entire imperial city. The magic array was connected by Bufang's mental energy, so Bufang was the controller of the magic array. Within the magic array, Bufang felt his body becoming stronger and stronger. There was a constant flow of energy from the magic array into his body. Compared to the Rampage Ramen, which doubled his strength, the magic array's amplification was even more terrifying. Bufang felt as though he was about to explode from the burst of true energy. Beads of blood seemed to seep out of his pores. Boom! The surging true energy surged into the Black Turtle constellation walk. The patterns on the walk suddenly emitted a golden radiance. The walk suddenly became like a small mountain, smashing down and covering Liang Kai. The ground trembled violently and cracked. The magic array revolved slowly, constantly providing energy. Bufang floated in the air, controlling the Black Turtle constellation walk with one hand. His body seemed to be emitting a radiance like a god. Everyone was dumbfounded. Looking at the sudden outburst of Bufang, they were dumbfounded for a moment. None of them had expected that Owner Bu, who was almost forced into a corner, would suddenly make such a big reversal. Wasn't Liang Kai not afraid of the Black Turtle constellation walk? Why was it smashed into the ground by the walk? Everyone was puzzled. Duan Yun took a deep breath. His horizons were naturally not something that the natives of the southern region could compare to. As he surveyed the hazy energy around him, his body and mind trembled. The sudden eruption of Bufang's combat power should be related to the hazy energy in the surroundings. He was no stranger to this power, it was the power of the formation. As an alchemist, things like arrays were a compulsory course. Formations were arranged using crystals, and by causing the different spirit chi between the crystals to resonate, it triggered a type of domain change. This method was very mysterious. Owner Bu's formation. It actually has the aura of a domain formation. This is unbelievable. Where did Owner Bu come from? Duan Yun was shocked. He realized that Bufang had given him too many surprises. A domain formation was not an ordinary formation. In order to set up a domain formation, one had to be a divine physique echelon expert who had broken through one of the Supreme Being's shackles. The more shackles a Supreme Being master broke, the more powerful the domain formation the array master could set up. Of course, this was only limited to array masters. Ordinary divine physique echelon experts did not have the time or effort to study arrays. This was because it was a broad and profound field of study. However, Bufang was merely an 8th grade war god, yet he was able to set up a domain formation that only divine physique echelon array masters could set up? Was this guy a freak? Bufang did not expect the power of the gourmet array to be so strong. It made him feel as though it could destroy everything. With a wave of his hand, the Black Turtle constellation walk flew up. Rubble fell from the walk. A roar came from the bottom of the walk. It was a roar that was filled with anger and unwillingness. Clang! A loud sound echoed. The Black Turtle constellation walk was knocked into the air by a huge force. Bufang held the Black Turtle constellation walk in his hand. His indifferent gaze swept across the ground that was caved in. There, Liang Kai's entire body seemed to be burning with flames. Drops of blood spurted out, making Liang Kai look even more miserable. Bufang was forced into a desperate situation, and Liang Kai was also forced into a miserable state. Sizzle, Liang Kai coughed and his body trembled. The flames on his body immediately subsided. He could no longer maintain the scorching sun demonic physique. I did not expect an ant like you to have such a trick up your sleeve. Unbelievable, an array. An 8th grade ant actually managed to set up a domain formation right before my eyes. Liang Kai's lips curled into a bitter and self-deprecating smile. He did not expect Bufang to use 9 bowls of rampage ramen to set up a domain formation. Damn it, he truly felt aggrieved. Moreover, because his body was pierced by the golden shrimpy, his vitality was greatly injured, his current battle prowess was greatly reduced. He was actually being suppressed by this ant. He felt a burning pain on his face. He stamped his foot down, and the ground immediately cracked open. Liang Kai's body surged with true energy, wanting to rush out of the deep pit. However, just as he floated out of the deep pit, he felt his heart palpitate. Bufang looked at him coldly. He stood proudly in the sky like a god and casually waved his hand. The black turtle constellation walk was immediately thrown out again. It expanded against the wind, and in a short while, it turned into a small mountain once again. Liang Kai felt like he was going to die. His vision was once again obscured by darkness. Just as he rushed out, his figure was ruthlessly smashed into the ground by the walk. Rumble! The ground shook again. Cracks continued to appear. On the city wall, Ji Qingxue and the others were already numb. Looking at Liang Kai, who had been smashed into the ground twice, they did not know what to say. The Grand Baron's sect disciples on the warship were even more frightened. Everyone swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Liang Kai, one of the Grand Baron's sect's 10 great sons of heaven, was actually crushed by an 8th grade war god. This world was a little crazy. Bei Gongming struggled his way to the front of the warship. Looking at the battle below, he sucked in a breath of air. No one knew better than him how powerful Liang Kai was. Liang Kai, who had obtained the sect's resources, had his cultivation level skyrocketed, and he had completely crushed him. However, such an existence was now being crushed like a dead dog by a walk. He grabbed the railing, his eyes filled with deep excitement and agitation. Bufang retrieved the black turtle constellation walk. Liang Kai, who was covered in blood, planned to take this opportunity to escape the deep pit. However, just as he shot out, the top of his head was once again obscured by darkness. The black turtle constellation walk smashed down again. At this moment, Liang Kai really wanted to curse angrily. However, before his voice could come out, it was drowned out again. Shameless! Who bullies others in battle like this? Do you dare to let me out of the deep pit? Liang Kai was so depressed that he almost vomited blood. He was crying in his heart. His body was already heavily injured. If this happened a few more times, he might really be smashed to death here. Liang Kai, one of the Grand Baron's sect's 10 great sons of heaven, was smashed to death by a walk in the training ground. If news of this were to spread, Liang Kai would become the laughing stock of the entire continent. Thinking of this, Liang Kai roared angrily again. Bang! However, the black turtle constellation walk smashed down again, and his roar was drowned out. Liang Kai felt hopeless. Cough, cough, cough. Up in the sky, beads of blood seeped out of Bufang's pores. He was almost dyed in blood. Forcefully controlling a power that far exceeded one's own limits was too much of a burden on one's body. After the last walk smashed down, Bufang's entire body fell from the sky. He landed on the edge of the deep pit. With a bang, the black turtle constellation walk turned into black smoke and dissipated. The gourmet magic array also dimmed, and the 9 beams of light gradually dispersed. Everyone was dumbfounded, and they didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Ouyang Xiaoyi and the others in the store widened their eyes. This lass, seeing Bufang fall, quickly ran out. She felt that Bufang's condition wasn't too good. When she picked up Bufang's snoring body, Ouyang Xiaoyi's mind trembled. It was the first time she saw Owner Boo in such a sorry state. Sighing, Ouyang Xiaoyi turned around, intending to bring Owner Boo back to the store. "It's over," Ouyang Xiaoyi muttered. "Who said it's over? Hand over that damned brat to me." A violent gasp, accompanied by the sound of coughing blood, resounded. Ouyang Xiaoyi's body stiffened. She turned her head with difficulty, and saw Liang Kai crawling out of the deep pit. His body was a bloody mess. This guy was still alive? Was he a cockroach? Ouyang Xiaoyi felt a wave of fear. Although Liang Kai was seriously injured, the pressure on his body made her stiff, and she couldn't move. She wanted to turn around and run, but she couldn't do it. Crack crack, Liang Kai strode forward with difficulty, step by step, toward Ouyang Xiaoyi, who was carrying Bufang. His breath was like a bellow and he was breathing heavily. He looked at Bufang with eyes full of murderous intent. Xiao Xiaolong, who was in the store, suddenly reacted. His pupils shrank and he quickly rushed out. Duan Yun also frowned and his figure flashed, wanting to save Bufang. However, after running a few steps, his body froze. His face was filled with disbelief. That was because he saw Liang Kai's body being pierced once again. Pierced by a beam of golden light, a gaping wound, and fresh blood splattered. That beam of light rotated in the air, then dispersed, revealing the face within. Everyone was speechless, because this golden light was none other than the golden shrimp that was used to lying on Owner Boo's shoulder, waving its sickle-like claws. Chapter 4:14. The golden light dissipated, revealing a dazzling mantis shrimp that looked like it was made of gold. The mantis shrimp floated in the air, the two sickle claws on its head swinging around. Its compound eyes rolled around as it stared at Liang Kai in the distance. The appearance of the mantis shrimp was beyond everyone's expectations. No one would have thought that at the last moment, the mantis shrimp that no one cared about would deliver such a fatal blow to Liang Kai. Ouyang Xiaoyi, holding Bufang in her arms, turned her head to look at Xiaopi, who was floating in the air. Her mouth was wide open, and her eyes were wide open. Xiao Xiaolong slowed down, but he still came to Ouyang Xiaoyi's side. With a swoosh, Duan Yun suddenly appeared. He pulled Ouyang Xiaoyi and Xiao Xiaolong away. Although Liang Kai was seriously injured, he was still a divine physique echelon expert. It would be difficult for the mantis shrimp to kill Liang Kai. Therefore, it was better to leave as soon as possible. Liang Kai's body trembled, and he coughed out a mouthful of blood. His eyes were full of disbelief. He looked down with difficulty, and saw another gaping hole on his body, from which blood was gushing out. The thick smell of blood spread. He was King tricked by this mantis shrimp again? Liang Kai looked at the mantis shrimp, so angry that he almost vomited blood. His body trembled violently, and his face grew paler. "Damn it! I will capture you and roast you!" Viciousness flashed in Liang Kai's eyes, and he strode forward again. Xiaopi floated in the air, waving its sickle claws. Looking at Liang Kai, who was striding forward, its figure turned into a golden bolt of lightning with a swoosh, shooting forward. Swoosh! Liang Kai let out a blood-curdling scream as another bloody hole appeared on his body. The golden light dissipated and Xiaopi paused in the air. Its body was resplendent, like gold, and not a drop of blood could be seen. Swoosh, swoosh. After pausing for a while, Xiaopi once again turned into a golden light, shuttling back and forth on Liang Kai's body. Bloody holes appeared one after another. Liang Kai kept coughing blood, and his breath was weakening rapidly. He wanted to block the mantis shrimp's attack, but his scorching sun demonic physique was too weak, and he couldn't summon it. Plop! Liang Kai was filled with hatred. His body was riddled with bloody holes, and he finally felt his life force rapidly slipping away from his body. His eyes were filled with sorrow, and his heart was filled with depression. The proud son of heaven of the Grand Baron sect, an existence that could become a giant in the future, was unexpectedly killed by a mantis shrimp in a training ground. How aggrieved was that? Liang Kai's hair was disheveled as he collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. However, he was ultimately unable to stop his life from slipping away. His body was covered in wounds, and there was a large hole in his chest. Even his heart was somewhat damaged. There was no cure at all. On the warship, the disciples of the Grand Baron's sect were stunned. After the initial shock, everyone became extremely frightened. Deep fear could be seen in their eyes. Dead again. This trial ground was too terrifying. 2 divine physique echelon experts had already fallen here. Executive Feng and Liang Kai were both divine physique echelon experts of the Grand Baron sect. They were obviously invincible existences in the training grounds, but reality was always so cruel. Both of them were dead. Buzz Liang Kai's lifeless body suddenly emitted an invisible wave of energy. A beam of light shot out from Liang Kai's body, accompanied by a floating jade talisman. The talisman wrapped around the remnant of his soul and flew toward the warship. This was a life-saving method that the Grand Baron sect left for every proud son of heaven of the Grand Baron sect. Even if their physical bodies were killed by a strong enemy, their soul could still escape with the help of the jade talisman. This jade talisman was very precious, and only proud sons of heaven of the Grand Baron sect could possess it. The mantis shrimp couldn't be bothered with the jade talisman. Its body moved, and it immediately flew back to Bufang, who was still in Ouyang Xiaoyi's arms. It lay on Bufang's shoulder and fell into a deep sleep. Buzz, the jade talisman wrapped around Liang Kai's soul, and returned to the warship. Set sail immediately back to the Grand Baron sect. Hurry! As soon as they returned to the warship, Liang Kai's shapeless figure emerged from the jade talisman. He roared, wanting to leave this place immediately. The Grand Baron's sect disciples on the metal battlefield hurried to start the warship. The heavy metal battlefield emitted a violent roar in the sky. It then began to slowly turn around and head out of the Imperial City. Xiaomeng, who was on the warship, stood up while clutching his chest. He took a deep look at the warship, and while the Grand Baron's sect disciples were panicking, he suddenly rushed out and jumped off the warship. The Grand Baron's sect disciples were shocked, but they couldn't care less about Xiaomeng. Bei Gongming stood up and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He looked at the faintly discernible Liang Kai's soul wrapped in the jade talisman. His eyes were as calm as an ancient well. He walked toward the jade talisman step by step. The muscles on his face suddenly trembled, and then he burst into laughter. His laughter grew louder and louder. It was so loud that the Grand Baron's sect disciples on the warship looked at him in bewilderment. Bei Gongming, what are you doing? You loser! Get lost! Seeing Bei Gongming slowly walking toward him, Liang Kai, who was wrapped in the jade talisman, suddenly let out a sharp scream. His scream was filled with fear. He roared and screamed, and the jade talisman trembled violently. 2 Grand Baron's sect disciples stood in front of Bei Gongming and coldly asked, "What are you doing?" Bei Gongming's eyeballs rolled slightly, then fell on the 2 disciples. The corners of his mouth curled up, revealing a cruel smile. "What am I doing? Of course, I'm going to take revenge. After waiting for so many years, I finally have the chance to take revenge. Those who stand in my way die." Bang! True energy surged from Bei Gongming's body, rolling up a waterfall and smashing into the 2 Grand Baron sect disciples. His figure shot out like a ghost, and his 2 palms smashed into the space between the 2 disciples' eyebrows. The 2 Grand Baron sect disciples fell to the ground with faces full of disbelief. They were killed just like that. Bei Gongming laughed loudly, and his whole body trembled violently. No one dared to continue standing in front of Bei Gongming. Liang Kai, who was inside the jade talisman, let out a terrified scream. "You can't kill me. If you kill me, the sect will never let you off." Looking at the trembling jade talisman, Bei Gongming exhaled deeply. This jade talisman should have belonged to him, and he should have been the one to become the chosen of heaven. However, everything was snatched away by Liang Kai. But it doesn't matter. From today onwards, I, Bei Gongming, will take everything back. The corners of Bei Gongming's mouth curled up. He raised his hand and grabbed at the jade talisman. Liang Kai, who was inside the jade talisman, struggled violently, roared, and bellowed. He even begged for mercy, but Bei Gongming was completely unmoved. Once the jade talisman was destroyed, Liang Kai would really die. Liang Kai didn't want to die. If you don't die, who will? Bei Gongming chuckled in a low voice. He suddenly clenched his fist, and true energy surged. With an explosive sound, the jade talisman was directly destroyed by the true energy, crushed into pieces. Liang Kai's face gradually distorted and crumbled within the true energy. His face was filled with hatred and malevolence, and he stared at Bei Gongming, screaming incessantly. However, without the jade talisman, his spiritual essence quickly dissipated. Grand Baron Sex chosen of heaven, Liang Kai. He perished. On the warship, the remaining Grand Baron sect disciples didn't even dare to breathe loudly. They didn't expect that Bei Gongming would actually dare to kill Liang Kai. Liang Kai was a son of heaven disciple whom the sect focused on nurturing. Yet, he died just like that. All of a sudden, the disciples felt a chill run down their spines. They realized that Bei Gongming's gaze had landed on them. His gaze was filled with ice-cold, murderous intent. Bei Gongming actually wanted to kill them? If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for seeing something you shouldn't have. The aura on Bei Gongming's body became even more intense. Then, his figure burst out along with the surging true energy. Swoosh! How could the remaining Grand Baron sect disciples stop Bei Gongming? They were all killed. Fresh blood splattered everywhere, staining the warship. It filled the warship with a somber aura and the smell of blood. Bei Gongming's entire body was covered in fresh blood. He slowly walked to the edge of the deck and held onto the railing. From the warship, he looked down at the Light Wind Empire's capital, which was gradually becoming smaller and smaller. He gazed deeply until the imperial capital was no longer in his line of sight. Inside the Light Wind Empire's capital, the departure of the metallic warship caused everyone to relax. That warship was like a killing machine hovering above their head. Once it disappeared, everyone felt much more relaxed. This battle was extremely bitter. Ji Qingxue walked down the city wall with a complicated expression on his face. He began the final preparations. Actually, he was already somewhat familiar with the process. After all, he had the most experience in reorganizing after a battle. Inside the store, Bufang leaned against a chair and took deep breath. He slowly opened his eyes. His eyelids felt so heavy, as if they were made of lead. Xiao Bai was also carried in by the crowd. However, everyone was somewhat silent. This was because no one had ever seen Xiao Bai in such a miserable state. Xiao Bai's body had been pierced through, and lightning arcs were flickering unceasingly. Xiao Bai, who used to be incomparably valiant, was now unable to move. His body was extremely tattered. Bufang's hair was disheveled. Today's business hours are over. Everyone, please leave. Bufang weakly said, ordering them to leave. Ouyang Xiaoyi and the others still wanted to say something. However, after seeing Bufang's appearance and hearing Bufang's order to leave, they sighed and left one after another. They closed the door. Bufang leaned against the door, feeling powerless all over. He didn't want to move at all. This was his most difficult battle to date. He had used almost all of his means, but in the end, he still couldn't defeat the enemy. If Xiaopi hadn't pierced through Liang Kai's body, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Bufang was helpless. This was also the reason why his cultivation level was too low. Even if he activated the gourmet array, his basic cultivation level was only that of an 8th grade war god. It was already a miracle that he could resist a divine physique echelon existence. In this battle, Xiaopi played a key role. However, Bufang knew that it was mainly because his cultivation level was too low. He suddenly realized that if he wanted to be a stable chef, his cultivation level must be strong enough. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to settle down. He scratched his slightly disheveled hair. Bufang leaned against the door, asking the system in his mind. System, is there any way to increase my cultivation level? After a moment of silence, the system finally opened its mouth. The host's cultivation level is based on the store's turnover. If you want to increase your cultivation level, you need to increase the turnover. Also, the host can activate branch missions. If the branch mission is activated, the host will not be able to return to the main store before completing the system's target. Chapter 4:15. A branch of the store? Bufang was taken aback. He didn't expect the system to give him such an answer. A small store could open a branch? Bufang had some doubts in his heart, but he quickly understood the system's meaning. There were two ways to increase sales. One was to sell expensive dishes in the store in the Imperial City. The higher the price of the expensive dishes, the more crystals they would earn from selling them. This would naturally increase the business. Of course, there was another way, and that was to open a branch. According to the system, the business of a branch could also be converted into cultivation. If two stores were to open at the same time, the sales would naturally be higher than that of a single store. After all, the Light Wind Imperial City was only so big, and the spending power here was limited. Even if Bufang came up with some expensive dishes, he might not be able to sell them. Therefore, a branch might be the next choice that Bufang had to make. Unless Bufang planned to stay in the store for the rest of his life. Perhaps before the battle today, Bufang really did have the intention to stay in the store forever. However, after the battle with Liang Kai, Bufang finally understood that if he wanted to live a stable life, his cultivation must not be weak. Because if his cultivation was weak, those with high cultivation could bully him, and his store could be closed down. This was the so-called, in the pugilistic world, life was beyond one's control. System, can you reveal the goal of the branch mission? Bufang propped himself up, and while asking the system, he walked to the side of Xiao Bai, who was lying on the floor of the store. Xiao Bai had indeed experienced a great disaster this time, and his body was badly damaged. Lightning arcs flickered incessantly on the body that had been torn apart. Bufang sighed and reached out his hand to touch his body. His fingers were slightly numb from the moving lightning arc. I can't reveal it for now. If the host doesn't complete the branch mission set by the system, he won't be allowed to return to the main store. The system still repeated the same sentence. Bufang understood. Obviously, this branch mission was not easy. However, he couldn't be bothered to think too much about it now. Perhaps this was the price he had to pay to improve his cultivation. System, is there any way to repair Xiao Bai? Bufang looked at Xiao Bai's side and asked. Xiao Bai had been with him since he opened the shop. If he were to disappear because of this, Bufang would really be reluctant. When the host sets up the branch at the designated destination, Xiao Bai will be restored and returned by the system. The system answered Bufang seriously. This answer made Bufang heave a sigh of relief. He was afraid that the system would say that Xiao Bai was scrapped and had to be recycled. That would be unacceptable to Bufang. Suddenly, Xiao Bai, who was lying on the ground, emitted a burst of light. The light flickered for a while, and Xiao Bai's figure gradually became transparent, then disappeared. Bufang stood up. He didn't have much worry in his heart. He still had a lot of trust in the system. Scratching his messy hair, Bufang took a deep breath. He patted Xiaopi, who was sleeping soundly on his shoulder, then turned around and walked back to his room. He returned to his room. Blackie was still lying peacefully on the ground. This plump dog was in a deep sleep. Even the huge shockwaves from the previous battle didn't wake him up. Bufang glanced at Blackie, then turned around and entered the bathroom. He took off his blood-stained clothes and took a refreshing hot bath. After taking a bath, Bufang became much more clear-headed. Forcefully linking the spirit energy chains of the 9 bowls of Rampage Ramen to form the gourmet array was too much of a burden on his mind. This caused his head to feel a little dizzy. After taking a bath, Bufang lay on the bed and fell into a deep sleep. After Duan Yun left Fang Fang's little store and returned to his elixir store, he was silent. He sat on a chair and looked at the elixir furnace in the elixir store, deep in thought. After a long time, he stood up and let out a sigh. He returned to his room and tidied up his clothes. That night, he left the imperial city of the Light Wind Empire. He was a little reluctant to part with it, then he turned around and left. Yesterday's battle had touched Duan Yun's heart. If he wanted to live a peaceful life, he needed to have a stable cultivation. If his cultivation wasn't high enough, once he encountered a strong enemy, it would be hard for him to live a peaceful life. Even someone as strong as Bufang couldn't live a peaceful life. The imperial city of the Light Wind Empire, inside the Great Strength Hall. Ji Qingxue and the ministers started a discussion that night. They were busy making arrangements for the post-battle restoration. Ji Qingxue was already familiar with these matters. Compared to the previous few times, this time was actually much better, and it was much easier to repair. After the battle, Xiao Yu also left the imperial city. This time, it was a huge blow to him. He realized that his cultivation wasn't strong enough. It could even be said that he was weak. When he encountered a true expert, he didn't even have the ability to resist. This made him feel very sullen. He felt that he couldn't stay cooped up in the imperial city forever. That would narrow his horizons. Thus, he bid farewell to the Xiao family and left the imperial city in the darkness of the night. When the sunlight shone in through the window, Bufang opened his slightly drowsy eyes. The sunlight was a little warm. It was obvious that it wasn't early in the morning. It was almost noon. Bufang didn't get up immediately. He still lay on the bed without moving. After a while, he lazily got up. After changing his clothes, Bufang washed his face and rinsed his mouth. Then he went to the store. The store's doors were already open. Ouyang Xiaoyi was in full swing, recording the customers' menus. In the kitchen, the sound of stir-frying could be heard. Xiao Xiaolong was earnestly cooking the dishes. Looking at this scene, Bufang felt as if he had been in a different world. Temporary mission. Set up a branch in the Hidden Dragon Continent's Heavenly Mist City. Mission reward: 10% increase in true energy cultivation. Preparation time: 3 days. The solemn voice of the system suddenly resounded in his mind. Bufang wasn't surprised. He had already expected this mission. Heavenly Mist City shouldn't be in the southern region, right? Bufang was puzzled. He wasn't completely clueless about the southern region and had never heard of Heavenly Mist City. Furthermore, since the system wanted him to open a branch, the purpose of opening a branch was to increase his business. Naturally, he couldn't open a branch in a place where the consumption level was lower than the Light Wind Imperial City. Heavenly Mist City is one of the 3 great pill cities under the Hidden Dragon Continent's alchemy sect. Alchemists flourish in the city, and the consumption level is extremely high. The competition is extremely fierce. The system seemed to know the doubts in Bufang's heart. It immediately introduced the city to him. Bufang was somewhat speechless. Heavenly Mist City was actually one of the pill cities. What was a pill city? For it to be called a pill city, it was enough to show how popular the city's alchemists were. Bufang curled the corner of his mouth. He knew that this mission of setting up a branch wouldn't be easy to complete. Pill City wasn't like the Light Wind Imperial City. In Pill City there were many alchemists. There was also a kind of elixir called the fasting pill. A single pill could satisfy a person's food needs for half a month. With this kind of elixir, Why would there be a need for a restaurant? This was the reason why Bufang was having a headache. Shaking his head, Bufang turned around and entered the kitchen. He began his daily cooking practice. Host: Bufang True Energy Cultivation. 8th grade. As a man who wants to stand at the top of the food chain in the fantasy world, he has finally gotten rid of the weak and small transformation. The road to becoming the god of cooking has become even more arduous. He has begun to set up a branch. His journey is the sea of stars. Cooking talent, 4 stars branch, preparing to set up skills. Level 2 meteor cutting technique, 100 out of 100, Level 2 Big Dipper carving technique, 100 out of 100 tools. Golden Dragon Bone Kitchen Knife, God of Cooking Set. Black and White Constellation Wok, God of Cooking Set. God of Cooking Overall Rating. Intermediate Chef, cooking talent has reached a higher level. Cooking skills have become more proficient. A wider world of cooking has opened up for you. You can start to cook functional ingredient. System level, 8 stars, energy conversion ratio is at 100%. Bufang looked at the system panel. He didn't know when, but he realized that a branch had appeared on the panel. It seemed like he really had to start preparing for the opening of a branch. However, once he opened a branch, Bufang might not be able to return to the Light Wind Empire in the short term. In any case, he had stayed here for a long time. For a moment, Bufang was a little reluctant to leave. After he left the Imperial City, the store would still have to operate as usual. However, he might have to rely on Xiao Xiaolong. Therefore, he had to give Xiao Xiaolong some advice and teach him how to cook a few dishes. Naturally, Xiao Xiaolong didn't know that Bufang was going to leave to open a branch. He thought that Bufang was going to leave for a while like before. Xiao Xiaolong already had experience. He patted his chest and promised that he would manage the store well. Moreover, he said that he would train his culinary skills well. When Bufang returned, he would definitely be amazed by the improvement of his culinary skills. Ouyang Xiaoi always felt that there was something wrong with Owner Bu, but she couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. Perhaps it was because girls were more sensitive. She always felt that Owner Bu seemed to be sentimental. When the opening hours of the day ended, Bufang rubbed Ouyang Xiaoi's head. Ouyang Xiaoi felt that something was wrong. Although she had doubts in her heart, Bufang didn't look any different from usual. Perhaps she was overthinking. After watching Ouyang Xiaoi and Xiao Xiaolong leave, Bufang closed the door. After walking one round in the store, he returned to his room. Blackie was still in a deep sleep. It was unknown when it would wake up. Perhaps after Bufang completed the branch mission and returned, Blackie would wake up. Bufang looked at Blackie deep in thought. Xiaopi was lying on his shoulder. Xiaopi's compound eyes were rolling around. White spots of light appeared above Bufang's head. Shortly after, they started to condense and draw the teleportation array. Bufang walked to the window and looked at the scenery of the Imperial City. Deep in his eyes, there was a hint of reluctance. Above his head, the teleportation array was formed. The wind rose and the waves rose. The teleportation began. Chapter 4:16. The southern region was vast, but compared to the Hidden Dragon continent, it was a lot smaller. The Hidden Dragon continent was a truly vast continent. The southern region was just a small region of the Hidden Dragon continent, very, very small. If one walked out of the southern region, they would step into the southern region. Although the Hidden Dragon continent was vast and boundless, it had still been explored by the predecessors throughout its long history. Generally speaking, people divided the Hidden Dragon continent into 5 big regions. The north, south, east, and west regions corresponded to the 4 directions. The central region was the last big region. People didn't call it the central region because it was the center of the Hidden Dragon continent and was occupied by a very powerful force. That force was the Hidden Dragon Royal Court, the only holy level force on the Hidden Dragon continent. Each of the 4 great regions was overseen by a first-rate force. The Grand Baron sect was a first-rate force, and it was a very well-known force on the continent. The southern region was just a training ground occupied by the Grand Baron sect. In the southern region, besides the first-rate Grand Baron sect, there was another first-rate Grand Baron sect that was very famous, the Alchemy sect. The strength of the Alchemy sect did not lie in the number of experts it had, but in the fact that the Alchemy sect controlled the majority of the Hidden Dragon continent's medicinal resources. Countless experts would flock to the Alchemy sect for the sake of a single medicinal pill. They came to the southern region as if they were on a pilgrimage. Therefore, in the Hidden Dragon continent, the Alchemy sect had another resounding name, the Pill Palace. There were 3 pill cities under the Pill Palace. Among them, the most famous one was naturally the leader of the Pill Cities, Heavenly Pill City. Next was Heavenly Shine City and Heavenly Mist City. Although Heavenly Mist City was the weakest of the 3 pill cities, the area it occupied was still incomparably vast. The degree of its splendor was not something the Light Wind Imperial City could compare with. There were countless experts in the Heavenly Mist City. Because it was a pill city, there were a lot of alchemists in the city. To become a powerful alchemist, not only did one have to have alchemy skills, one also had to have fighting strength. The main reason why pill cities were called pill cities was because every pill city had a pill tower. That was the symbol of Pill City. Inside there were countless precious pills. Even the legendary 5-mark divine pill existed. The Heavenly Mist City was brightly lit at night, as if it was a city that never slept. In a pitch-black alleyway, a gust of strong wind whistled and swept up thousands of waves. White spots of light appeared in the void and drew a formation. A blurry figure slowly walked out from the formation. Bufang was wearing a white robe, and his hair was tied up with a velvet rope. He looked quite spirited. The wind and waves disappeared, and the surroundings became quiet. Bufang took a deep breath and immediately smelled a foul stench, causing him to frown uncontrollably. The system's teleportation was becoming more and more unreliable. He was actually teleported to the side of a garbage dump. This pitch-black and quiet alley was actually filled with smelly garbage, and the smell was extremely unpleasant. Bufang covered his mouth and nose, waved his hand, and quickly walked out of the alley. As soon as he walked out of the pitch-black and silent alley, it was as if a glimmer of hope had appeared at the end of a tunnel. Bufang's eyes suddenly lit up. An ear-piercing clamor sounded in his ears, and his eyes were covered by a dazzling light. Bufang couldn't help but squint his eyes. The liveliness of the Heavenly Mist City made it hard for Bufang to adapt. After walking out of the alley, he saw a wide street in the distance. There were rows of houses on both sides of the street, and they were extremely tall. Some of them were tens of meters tall, and they were like giants. It was just like the metropolis of his previous world. Moreover, it was brightly lit and it was bustling with activity. Bufang really felt as if he had returned to the metropolis of his previous world. Was this the metropolis of the other world? Bufang felt an indescribable excitement in his heart. He clasped his hands behind his back and slowly walked on the wide street. The hawkers on both sides of the street were shouting unceasingly. Bufang listened attentively, and he realized that the things these people were selling were actually elixirs. Elixirs, which were extremely rare in the Light Wind Imperial capital, could be found everywhere in Pill City like cabbages. Almost every shop was selling elixirs. The towering building that was dozens of meters tall made Bufang feel as if he had become very small. At the bottom of the tall buildings there were many bronze iron gates. The iron gates were wide open and people walked in and out. The pace of life here was much faster than in the Light Wind Imperial capital. Bufang felt as if he had stepped into a metropolis from a backward village in his previous world. He really couldn't adapt to it. However, he had no choice. The system required him to open a branch in this city. This was a mission that not only concerned his cultivation, but also whether or not Xiao Bai could be restored. Perhaps it was because the city had expanded, but the cultivation level of the people in Heavenly Mist City was much higher than that of the Light Wind Imperial capital. Up until now, Bufang noticed that the weakest person was a brat wearing open crotch pants, who was running around with his legs wide open. He was a third-grade battle maniac. The others had basically reached the level of battle emperors and battle saints. 8th-grade war gods and even supreme beings were not that rare. Some of the guards in the high-class shops were even at the supreme being level. In the Light Wind Empire, an existence that could become an overlord of a region had become rather common in this big city. After sighing, Bufang continued forward. If he wanted to open a branch in Heavenly Mist City, he would have to face a serious problem: how to find a shop to open a shop. Even in the Light Wind Imperial capital, it was not easy to find a shop, let alone in this Heavenly Mist City. For a moment, Bufang felt a headache coming on. 9th-grade elixir, Spirit Tiger elixir, starting a clearance sale. 1 elixir for only 10,000 crystals, first come, first served. 8th-grade elixir, Harmony Spirit elixir, selling at a loss, definitely able to recoup the cost, absolutely authentic. 9th-grade elixir, Mysterious Azure elixir, the work of Pill Palace's One Cloud alchemist, Grandmaster Nangong Qing. Feel at ease buying it. If you miss it, you will regret it for the rest of your life. As he walked through the bustling streets, Bufang became more and more depressed. He realized that all the shops in this Heavenly Mist City were actually elixir stores. The deafening cries of the people selling their wares were no different from those of peddlers. He looked for a long time, but he couldn't find a single restaurant. Could it be that the people in this city didn't eat? Eating elixirs like they were fried beans every day? Filling their stomachs? Food was the most important thing to the people, so how could there not be a single restaurant? This was simply a huge business opportunity. It seemed like it was just as Bufang thought. The people of Heavenly Mist City didn't need restaurants. There were many inns, but there were very few restaurants. After searching for an entire night, Bufang felt a little tired, so he didn't choose to continue searching. Instead, he entered an inn. This inn occupied an extremely tall building, and the decorations were quite luxurious. When Bufang stepped into the inn, a young and beautiful lady came over to receive Bufang. "Do you know where I can find a restaurant in Heavenly Mist City?" Bufang asked the lady who was preparing a room for him. "Restaurant?" The lady was slightly taken aback, and her gaze when she looked at Bufang was a little strange. Bufang furrowed his brows and earnestly explained, "It's a place to eat. Dear customer, you aren't a native of Heavenly Mist City, right? Heavenly Mist City is one of the pill cities of the Pill Palace, so why would anyone be so stupid as to open a restaurant here? More than 10 years ago, the alchemists of the Nangong family of the Pill Palace invented a type of multi-taste fasting pill. It's of good quality and low price, and one pill can fill one's stomach. There are also different flavors, so all the restaurants closed down," the lady explained to Bufang with a smile. "Here. This is the multi-taste fasting pill." The lady looked at Bufang's bewildered gaze, and with a smile, she poured out several elixirs from her pouch. These elixirs were colorful and emitted an alluring fragrance. "These elixirs are half a year's worth of food for me," the lady said, then picked one out and gave it to Bufang. "Try it." Bufang raised his eyebrows. These elixirs were worth half a year's worth of food? Interesting. Bufang did not reject it. He took the elixir, put it under his nose and sniffed it. Then, he stuffed it into his mouth. The moment the elixir entered his mouth, a fruity fragrance instantly blossomed in his mouth. The elixir turned into liquid and flowed into his stomach. He couldn't help but furrow his brows at the feeling of fullness. He didn't like this feeling. The enjoyment of eating delicious food when he was hungry wasn't something an elixir could satisfy. The person who invented this elixir is simply devoid of morals. He's suppressing his natural instincts, Bufang solemnly said. The lady instantly laughed from ear to ear. She felt that Bufang was really interesting and thought that Bufang was just joking. The room prepared for Bufang was also ready. The lady brought Bufang into a magic array. With a flash of light, they arrived at the 10th floor. This is your room. The deposit is 50 crystals. When you check out tomorrow, you can get half of the crystals back, the lady said. Bufang immediately pursed his lips. It actually cost 50 crystals to stay for a night. This was even more shameful than his store. A bowl of egg-fried rice in his store was only 10 crystals. After paying the crystals to the lady, Bufang turned around and was about to close the door. However, the lady called out to Bufang. There was a hesitant look on her face. Bufang was taken aback and looked at her with a puzzled expression. Dear customer, actually, there is a restaurant in Heavenly Mist City. The lady hesitated for a long time. In the end, she bit her tender red lips and said. Bufang was taken aback. A trace of joy involuntarily appeared in his eyes. I was wondering how such a big city wouldn't have a restaurant. Where is it? The lady sighed and said, Actually, that restaurant was opened by my friend. I've been persuading her to find something else to do after graduating from the Alchemy Institute. However, she insisted on inheriting that restaurant which had no future. How could it have no future? It has a great future, okay? Your friend has good foresight. Bufang was instantly displeased. What did she mean by there was no future in opening a restaurant? This kind of perception was wrong. In the Light Wind Empire, one would be caught and drowned in a pig cage. The lady didn't seem to want to say too much. After telling Bufang an address, she turned around and left. Bufang returned to his room. He clasped his hands behind his back and paced around the room. The name of the restaurant that the lady mentioned previously echoed in his mind. Cloud Mist Restaurant? Is that the last restaurant in Heavenly Mist City? Chapter 4:17. The older a store was, the more treasures it would have. Those treasures were the skills that had been passed down from generation to generation. When the boorish man saw that Bufang was standing there in a daze, he was taken aback and reminded Bufang of something. And Ai Yen was rather carefree. After she had thought it through, a relieved smile blossomed on her peerlessly beautiful face. After a short while, the tall and sturdy woman came out with a steaming hot dish in her hand. The corners of Bufang's mouth twitched violently as he watched the woman's swinging hands and jogging away. There were several spirit trees in the store, and they were emitting spirit energy. They made the air in the restaurant even fresher. Oh? Did the sun rise from the west today? There are actually people who come to eat in this lousy restaurant of yours? Dear customer, please give it a try. I haven't cooked for a long time, so my skills are a little rusty. The tall and sturdy woman was slightly embarrassed, and she moved her bucket-like waist. Nangong Ming, what are you doing? My restaurant is open for business. If you want to cause trouble, you can come back later. A tall and sturdy man was lying on the counter of the restaurant. It was extremely difficult to sell elixirs that had been concocted in Heavenly Mist City. Sir, you aren't from my Heavenly Mist City, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't have come to such a remote restaurant to eat. Nangong Ming said with a smile, I've said it before. Anyone who eats in this restaurant is my enemy. Is this egg-fried rice? A signboard was hung in front of the restaurant. Give me a set of your best dishes, Bufang said. A bang resounded. Thus, the competition for elixir stores in Heavenly Mist City was extremely intense. And in that cost 50 crystals a night was indeed very comfortable to stay in. After all, you get what you pay for. Whether it was the facilities inside or the tranquil environment, they all gave Bufang a good living experience. There were many carriages pulled by different spirit beasts on the street. They were traveling at an extremely fast speed. Bufang was somewhat puzzled. After saying that, the woman turned her head and looked at Bufang warmly. He felt as if a bolt of lightning had passed through his mind at lightning speed. Bufang took a deep breath, but he still couldn't smell any fragrance. Nangong Ming walked around Yang Meiji and sat across from Bufang. He looked at Bufang with great interest. It wasn't easy for a customer to come to her store. How could she let him ruin it? He slammed his palm on the table. It seemed that they were almost at the restaurant. You can imagine the back of a burly man running like a little girl. When she inherited her father's restaurant, her goal was no longer to earn money. Instead, it was to fulfill her heart's original goal and to remember the glory of the many restaurants in Heavenly Mist City. Both sides of the street were filled with elixir shops. These elixir sellers were all alchemists. Bufang's eyes widened. The moment Nangong Ming slammed his palm on the table, he finally couldn't hold it in any longer. Compared to elixirs, Bufang believed in his culinary skills more. A woman's voice came out of the burly man's mouth. Yang Meiji's huge body trembled in fear. She sprayed all of it on Nangong Ming's face. Bufang patted his face and let out a long breath. His face was filled with lingering fear. She looked at Ouyang Xiaoyi and asked with a strange expression. Ouyang Xiaoyi nodded with certainty. "Dear customer, don't worry. Eat slowly. I, Yang Meiji, guarantee that no one will disturb your meal." The risk was equally high. It turned out that this fellow was a woman. "You? Yang Meiji, who do you think you can stop? I really didn't expect that someone in Heavenly Mist City would choose to eat in a restaurant. TSK, TSK, TSK. The world is really big. Nothing is too strange. Welcome to the Cloud Mist Restaurant. How can I help you?" What was up with this burly man in front of her? He opened his mouth and spat out the rice and egg pieces in his mouth. They were two young men clad in black robes. One of them had a disdainful expression on his face. He swept his gaze over the store and snorted coldly. Being able to stir-fry egg-fried rice without the slightest aroma was also a skill. However, she wasn't surprised at all. Owner Bu would go out every other day and rarely stayed in the store. However, every time Owner Bu came back, he would come up with a new dish. He probably went out to look for inspiration. However, Bufang, who was bored to death, couldn't help but furrow his brows. There wasn't even the slightest aroma coming from the kitchen. This was somewhat strange. Just when Bufang was about to stuff the egg-fried rice into his mouth, a mocking voice came from outside. Bufang's expression became solemn. He picked up a porcelain spoon and scooped up a spoonful of egg-fried rice. After bidding farewell to Ouyang Xiaoyi and Xiao Xiaolong, she turned around and left the store. Her graceful figure quickly disappeared into the bustling streets of the Imperial City. The Heavenly Mist City was really big. Rows upon rows of houses were built on both sides of the street. The streets were crisscrossed with crisscrossed paths, and each and every one of them gave Bufang the feeling that he was walking into a maze. The restaurant's hygiene was pretty good. It didn't have the musty smell of an old house. Even though there weren't many customers, every table was clean and spotless. The sound of Bufang's footsteps entering the store was very light, but his burly figure still trembled. His ears twitched and he abruptly raised his head. He didn't expect that the owner of this store was really a woman. It seemed like he didn't come to the wrong place. A supreme being expert? Yang Meiji was startled and looked at the man. As for Nangong Ming's words, he didn't listen to them at all. However, a man beside Nangong Ming took a step forward and placed his hand on Yang Meiji's shoulder. The latter couldn't move at all. Bufang, who originally wanted to ask about the Cloud Mist restaurant, felt a little regretful. It was the only restaurant in the city and it didn't have many competitors. How could it not have a single customer? This fellow's culinary skills were almost on par with Ouyang Xiaoyi's. After checking out of his room, Bufang walked out of the luxurious inn and walked along the streets of the Heavenly Mist City according to the information given to him by the woman the day before. After the initial shock, Bufang calmed down. He looked for a place to sit down and calmly glanced at the woman. Bufang's face was solemn as he looked at the egg-fried rice in his porcelain spoon. He took a deep breath and his heart became extremely solemn. It was an eyesore. A woman's voice, which wasn't very sharp, resounded. A tall and sturdy figure walked out from behind the counter and appeared in front of Bufang. Bufang's heart trembled. He saw two figures slowly walking into the Cloud Mist restaurant. When the tall and sturdy woman heard this voice, her complexion changed. Her face was filled with grief and indignation. The next day, he checked out of his room early. The person in charge of checking out wasn't the woman he saw the day before. It was time for her to leave the southern region. Poochie. Cloud Mist restaurant. Forget it. Since it was like this, they could only meet again if fate willed it. She sighed and her face was filled with disappointment. She originally wanted to meet Owner Boo and taste the dishes cooked by Owner Boo. Under normal circumstances, such stir-fried dishes would emit a slight fragrance. With Bufang's sense of smell, he would definitely be able to smell it. Even if he heard it, Bufang was too lazy to reply. When it was time to eat, Bufang wouldn't make a fuss. He raised his porcelain spoon and shoved the steaming hot egg-fried rice into his mouth. Bufang looked at the burly man's gaze and his hair stood on end. This egg-fried rice. It's really killing me. The rice grains had been fried until they were a little charred, however. When Bufang saw these houses, his face revealed a hint of excitement. The rows of high-rise buildings on both sides of the street had disappeared. They had all turned into low-rise houses. Bufang just walked in front of these elixir stores and was almost dragged into a shop by a group of enthusiastic waiters. He stepped into the restaurant. These houses were somewhat dilapidated and very old. It was obvious that they had been here for a long time. Compared with the previous high-rise buildings, they were two extremes. However, Bufang put on a straight face and rejected them mercilessly, as if he didn't want any strangers to approach him. In the kitchen, the sound of stir-frying resounded. There was also the sound of metal colliding with iron wok and spatula. Bufang sized up the person in front of him and instantly furrowed his brows. What? You said that Owner Boo left the Imperial City for a long trip again? Bufang widened his eyes and looked at the bowl of egg-fried rice in front of him. However, it was different from what Bufang had imagined. The last restaurant in the Heavenly Mist City was actually frighteningly quiet. There wasn't even a single customer. The latter's body stiffened as he blankly looked at Bufang. His face was covered with charred rice grains and he was dumbstruck. The Heavenly Mist City was more advanced and prosperous than the Light Wind Empire's Imperial City. The tall and sturdy woman's body moved and blocked in front of the two youths. She coldly said, "He didn't go the wrong way, right? Yesterday, that woman said that the owner of the restaurant was her best friend, so she should be a woman as well. Although being an alchemist was a profession that allowed one to get rich quickly, in reality, there were very few alchemists who could actually make money. This was because there was a chance of failure in alchemy. Once a failure occurred, the materials, energy, and money invested would all go down the drain. There was a sense of rhythm to it. As expected, after taking a few more steps, Bufang saw a restaurant in the distance. Bufang never looked down on any small restaurant because there was a chance that a small restaurant would serve a dish that would shock him. When Bufang looked at the bowl of egg-fried rice, which didn't even have a single piece of egg, he was speechless. In the end, he didn't even know where that bastard ran off to. Nangong Ming slowly walked forward. Yang Meiji glared at him and took a step forward, wanting to stop him. Sizzle. The Cloud Mist Restaurant. It seems like it's just this way. Go straight. Bufang looked at the address once more and furrowed his brows. Bufang suddenly felt uneasy in his heart. Bufang continued walking forward. On his shoulder, the golden shrimp was sleeping soundly. Brat. Are you deaf? Didn't you hear me talking to you? Nangong Ming looked at Bufang, who was ignoring him, and a trace of displeasure flashed in his eyes. When the woman heard Bufang's words, she immediately became excited. She squinted her eyes and swayed her huge body as she excitedly ran toward the kitchen. As she walked further and further away, the clamor in the surroundings gradually disappeared. Bufang felt that the reason why there weren't any customers in the restaurant was because of this woman. That woman's egg-fried rice didn't emit any fragrance. She was quite capable. Chapter 4:18. Patter, patter, patter. The sound of the egg-fried rice falling onto the table was unexpectedly heard. Bufang grinned and his face darkened. He looked at the bowl of egg-fried rice with a lingering fear in his heart. He finally understood why the last restaurant in the Heavenly Mist City had such a bad business. Could this egg-fried rice be eaten? Could even kill someone? Nangong Ming's whole body stiffened. His wretched face was actually covered with the egg-fried rice spat out by Bufang. A thumb-sized piece of egg was still stuck on his face and was slowly sliding down. Finally, with a smacking sound, the piece of egg fell onto the table and emitted a clear and melodious sound. At this moment, the atmosphere in the store became a little strange. Bufang took a deep breath and dispelled the disgust in his heart. Your egg-fried rice is completely substandard. How dare you open a restaurant with such a dish? Bufang wiped the corners of his mouth and raised his head to look at Yang Meiji, who was standing in the distance. He was extremely angry. After searching for so long, he finally found a restaurant. However, this restaurant only served him a bowl of egg-fried rice that was as hard as a rock. Where was his dignity as a restaurant? Serving such a dish was simply a disgrace to the restaurant's reputation. Bufang was extremely angry. When he spoke, his tone became much more serious. Yang Meiji and the youth looked at Bufang with an odd expression. They didn't expect that Bufang would suddenly become so angry. Yang Meiji could hear the dissatisfaction in Bufang's words. Her rough face instantly became flushed and her eyes were filled with shame. Bang! Before Yang Meiji could say anything, Nangong Ming, who had just cleaned up the egg-fried rice on his face, slapped the table with a disgusted expression. This table wasn't the one in Fong Fong's little store. Although Nangong Ming's cultivation hadn't reached the Supreme Being realm, he was still an 8th-grade war god. With a single slap, the table was shattered into pieces. The egg-fried rice on the table fell to the ground and scattered all over the floor. You brat, you actually dared to spit at me? Are you tired of living? Nangong Ming's eyes were filled with coldness. He stood up and looked down at Bufang. As an alchemist who had a slight obsession with cleanliness, Nangong Ming simply could not tolerate such a disgusting sight. There was only one thought in his mind, and that was to beat up this disgusting fellow in front of him. Daring to come to this cloud mist restaurant to eat, and even daring to spit egg-fried rice on his face, he was simply courting death. Yang Meiji's expression changed, and her eyes widened. When she saw that Nangong Ming was about to attack Bufang, she immediately shouted, "Nangong Ming, what are you doing? Stop right now!" Its enormous body suddenly moved, and like a gust of wind, it suddenly appeared in front of Nangong Ming. Yang Meiji's body wasn't any weaker than the burly man's. Suddenly, she released a majestic aura. "This guest is a customer of my Cloud Mist restaurant. If you dare to hurt him, I, Yang Meiji, will not forgive you." Humph! Yang Meiji, you are a disgrace to Great Master Xian Bei's name. No matter what, you are Great Master Xian Bei's disciple, and you are an outstanding alchemist. Yet, you are hiding in an alley and opening a restaurant. Do you know what it means to open a restaurant in Heavenly Mist City? Nangong Ming rolled his eyes, and his gaze fell on Yang Meiji's burly body. He said disdainfully, "It means that you are an idiot. Ever since my Nangong family researched the multi-taste fasting pill, who would be foolish enough to open a restaurant in Heavenly Mist City like you? You are an alchemist, yet you still can't see through this?" Yang Meiji clenched her fists, and her eyes turned red. The flesh on her face trembled, and it seemed like she was unwilling to accept this outcome. This was her father's business, and she had promised her father that she wouldn't let the Cloud Mist restaurant disappear. So, the multi-taste fasting pill, which tastes like dog poop, was created by your family? Just when Nangong Ming was filled with excitement, a figure walked out from behind Yang Meiji's enormous body. A faint voice floated out. Yang Meiji was taken aback. Nangong Ming and the Supreme Being Youth beside him were also taken aback. They didn't expect that someone would use such a vulgar word to describe the multi-taste fasting pill. That was the pride of their Nangong family. Nangong Ming's hair stood on end, and he glared at Bufang's thin figure with a sinister gaze. This kid was really courting death. First, he sprayed egg-fried rice on his face, and now, he even dared to insult the Nangong family. Especially the multi-taste fasting pill, which was an insult to the Nangong family. Did he really think that Nangong Ming wouldn't dare to kill him? Nangong Ming took a deep breath, and he looked at Bufang as he said word by word, "Do you know what you are talking about? The multi-taste fasting pill is a suppression of human nature, and it's a degeneration of morality. Am I wrong? How can a pill that tastes like dog poop replace the wonderful feeling of tasting delicacies?" Bufang said expressionlessly. He didn't hold back, and he really didn't like the multi-taste fasting pill. Yang Meiji looked at Nangong Ming, whose expression was becoming more and more unsightly, and she hurriedly pulled Bufang's sleeve. The appearance of the multi-taste fasting pill changed the direction of the Heavenly Mist City's food industry. Before the multi-taste fasting pill appeared, there were many restaurants in the Heavenly Mist City. However, after the appearance of the multi-taste fasting pill, restaurants in the Heavenly Mist City closed down one after another. A single multi-taste fasting pill could satisfy one's needs for several days, and it also had a variety of flavors. With such a convenient pill, who would go to a restaurant to eat? Yang Meiji, an extraordinary person, has come to your restaurant. This is the first time I've seen someone who dares to say such things about my Nangong family's multi-taste fasting pill. Nangong Ming smiled, and his smile made people's hair stand on end. The muscles on Yang Meiji's body bulged, and she took a step forward, standing in front of Bufang. Yang Meiji, you should know why I came here. Today you must sell this restaurant even if you don't want to. As for this kid, he must pay the price for his words, Nangong Ming said coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, the Supreme Being Youth, who was standing beside Nangong Ming, instantly moved. A berserk aura burst forth from his body, and he charged toward Bufang. Yang Meiji's eyes widened in anger, and the muscles on her body bulged. She took a step forward and punched the Supreme Being Youth. Who dares to touch a customer of my restaurant? Bang! Yang Meiji, who was only an 8th grade war god, was actually able to send a Supreme Being flying back several steps with a single punch. Her ferocious and valiant aura stunned Bufang. Was this guy really a woman? The Supreme Being Youth's complexion turned ashen. He was actually forced back by an 8th grade war god, and it was simply shameful. He was startled, and his figure flickered. He wanted to use his powerful aura to suppress Yang Meiji. Nangong Ming sneered. Yang Meiji and Nangong Ming were both disciples of a 3-mark alchemist in the Heavenly Mist City, and they were both Grandmaster Xian Bei's disciples. However, Yang Meiji's talent was much higher than Nangong Ming's, and she was naturally valued by Grandmaster Xian Bei. After Yang Meiji graduated from the Alchemy Institute, she was supposed to continue studying under Grandmaster Xian Bei. However, no one expected that she would return to her family's dilapidated store and open a restaurant that was on the verge of being eliminated. This gave Nangong Ming an opportunity. He had always been suppressed by Yang Meiji in the academy, and now that he had left the academy, he wanted to return all the grievances he had suffered to that foolish woman. Didn't she care about this restaurant? Then he would buy this restaurant and make this stupid woman homeless. Bang! Yang Meiji was, after all, only an 8th grade war god. She relied on her innate divine strength to fight against the Supreme Being Youth for a while. However, she was still sent flying, and she even crushed a table. In an instant, the store became a mess. The Supreme Being Youth's hair fluttered in the wind, and his gaze was ice-cold. He looked at young Meiji, who was lying on the ground, and revealed a sneer. However, his sneer quickly froze. That was because young Meiji had crawled up from the ground and was still standing in front of Bu Fong. "Dear customer, I'm really sorry for letting you see such a joke. You should quickly leave. I will deal with them," Yang Meiji said in a muffled voice. Bu Fong looked at Nangong Ming, then at the Supreme Being Youth, who was sneering. He then looked at Yang Meiji, who was standing in front of him. He furrowed his brows. The golden mantis shrimp, who was lying on his shoulder, shook its body and changed into a more comfortable sleeping position. Bu Fong caressed Xiaopi and let out a breath. Bang! Yang Meiji was sent flying again, and she smashed the last table in front of her. The Supreme Being Youth was infuriated. Or, it could be said that he was furious. After he smashed Yang Meiji to the ground with his palm, his true energy appeared, and it transformed into a sharp blade made of true energy. He wanted to cripple this woman, who didn't have the slightest bit of strength. Nangong Ming's gaze flickered, but he didn't stop him. The Supreme Being Youth sneered inwardly, and he became even more confident. He wasn't afraid of a disciple abandoned by Master Xian Bei. In any case, he, Nangong Ming, was planning to use improper means to take over this restaurant. The Supreme Being Youth's eyes were filled with excitement. He raised his blade made of true energy, and it seemed as though it wanted to cut through the air as it slashed toward Yang Meiji. Nangong Ming's entire body trembled with excitement. "Stupid woman, go to hell!" However, just as the blade made of true energy was about to slash Yang Meiji's neck, all of a sudden, a patch of darkness appeared in front of the young Supreme Being. A huge black walk filled his vision. In his vision, the black walk became bigger and bigger. Bang! A muffled sound echoed, and the Supreme Being Youth felt as though he was about to ascend to the heavens. His face came into contact with the black walk, and all sorts of emotions gushed out of him. "Did I say that the fasting pill is dog's it? Do you have a problem with that?" Bu Fong calmly looked at Nangong Ming after he sent the Supreme Being flying with the walk. Chapter 419. A loud bang resounded. The body of the young Supreme Being who came along with Nangong Ming was smashed into the ground. Anguished wails continuously came out of his mouth. The Supreme Being felt as though his entire face didn't belong to him anymore. His nose was sore, and it was as though all sorts of sweet, sour, bitter, and spicy flavors were released at this moment. Tears were about to fall from his eyes. Nangong Ming took in a deep breath and looked at Bu Fong, who had sent the Supreme Being expert flying. He didn't expect that this kid, who he didn't even put in his eyes, would have the strength to send a Supreme Being flying. What was that thing in his hand? A wok? Was that the thing that could send a Supreme Being expert flying? This was simply inconceivable. It was the first time he saw someone fight while carrying a wok. Could it be that this kid was a chef? Nangong Ming thought about many things. He looked at Bu Fong with a gloomy and unfathomable gaze. Yang Meiji was dumbfounded. Ever since she got up from the ground, her mouth had been agape. All of her muscles were trembling as she looked at Bu Fong, who was holding a wok. Bu Fong shot a glance at Yang Meiji, who had just gotten up from the ground. His gaze fell on Nangong Ming once again. Nangong Ming clenched his teeth, and the muscles on his face seemed to be trembling. He coldly looked at Bu Fong. The Supreme Being rubbed his tears for a while to relieve the burning sensation on his face. Then, he looked at Bu Fong with a malevolent gaze. "You are courting death." His ice-cold words were squeezed out of his mouth, and his aura surged even more violently. As a Supreme Being, he was actually injured by an 8th-grade war god, who came out of nowhere. This was simply a great humiliation. Bang! True energy surged out like a mad dragon. The Supreme Being's hair fluttered in the wind as he coldly looked at Bufang. He took a step forward, and his entire body rapidly dashed forward. Then, he swatted at Bufang with his palm. Bufang's gaze was calm, and his face was expressionless. With the black turtle constellation walk in his hand, he had no problem dealing with ordinary Supreme Beings. How could an ordinary Supreme Being withstand a single smash from the walk? The young man in front of him was only at the Supreme Being early stage. Therefore, Bufang was not worried at all. He didn't even bother to eat the rampage ramen. The black turtle constellation walk emitted a golden radiance as his true energy filled the walk. The aura of the sovereign youth was like a dragon. Every step he took would cause the ground to shatter. Broken fragments were constantly flying in all directions. A palm slapped down with an imposing aura. This time, Ji Zun, who had gone all out, believed that it was impossible for him to be sent flying again. Previously, he had only been ambushed because of his carelessness. Any sneak attack was useless in front of true strength. Bang! A muffled sound. An unstoppable force spread out from the walk. The face of the Supreme Being youth was somewhat bewildered. The true energy on his palm was directly smashed by Bufang's walk, causing it to shatter. He felt a stifling sensation in his chest, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. His body wasn't even sent flying. Instead, he was pressed to the ground by the walk. His chest heaved up and down like a bellows as he gasped for breath. How was this possible? Nangong Ming's complexion changed. He didn't expect that his Supreme Being subordinate would be easily dealt with by an 8th-grade war god. Nangong Ming looked at his subordinate, who was calmly pressing down on him with a walk, and a trace of fear emerged in his heart. Do you really want to oppose my Nangong family? In Heavenly Mist City, going against the Nangong family won't end well. Nangong Ming's heart trembled. He could only blame Bufang for using the Nangong family to suppress the kid in front of him. The Nangong family was one of the great families in Heavenly Mist City. They controlled the majority of the Pill Tower's resources. Their family's business covered the entire Heavenly Mist City, and they had dozens of mark-grade alchemists. This was a power that couldn't be ignored. They were a giant existence in Heavenly Mist City, and no one dared to oppose them. Of course, the Nangong family wouldn't cause such a ruckus just for Nangong Ming. Nangong Ming was just using a tiger's skin to scare Bufang. It was a pity that he was scaring the wrong person. If it was anyone else in Heavenly Mist City, they would probably be scared by him. However, Bufang didn't know anything about the Nangong family. Moreover, even if he knew about the Nangong family, Bufang wouldn't feel anything. After all, when he was just an 8th-grade war god, he dared to use a black walk to fight against a 10th-grade divine expert. That Supreme Being expert was sent flying by Bufang's kick, and he fell heavily on the door. He coughed out blood and struggled to get up from the ground. Get lost. I won't sell this Cloud Mist restaurant to you, Bufang said calmly as he swept his gaze over the Cloud Mist restaurant. Nangong Ming was taken aback and he sneered. He opened his mouth, and just when he was about to say something, his pupils suddenly constricted. Thump! He saw Bufang slam the black walk on the ground, and the entire ground shook. Nangong Ming was scared out of his walk. He didn't hesitate, and he turned around and walked out of the restaurant. Just you wait and see. Soon, this area will become my Nangong family's fasting pills selling area. At that time, this area will be filled with people, and your restaurant will be deserted. Just you wait to become the joke of the entire Heavenly Mist City. Nangong Ming walked to the door, and he suddenly turned around and sneered. However, he still wanted to ridicule Bufang a few more times, but he saw Bufang pick up the black walk. His heart shuddered, and he didn't hesitate to turn around and leave. The restaurant regained its silence. However, the originally clean and tidy store was now dirty and messy, and everything was in ruins. Yang Meiji looked at the messy surroundings and sighed. It seemed like she was already used to this kind of situation. After thanking Bufang, she rolled up her sleeves and started to tidy up the surroundings. The tables and chairs were already smashed, and the ground was full of holes. This store didn't have any protective arrays, and it couldn't withstand the damage caused by a battle between Supreme Being experts. After tidying up the store for a while, it became clean again. However, without the tables and chairs, the store suddenly became empty. "Dear customer, I'm sorry for letting you see such a joke," Yang Meiji said to Bufang apologetically. Her complexion was pale and unsightly, and she hurriedly took out a magnetic bottle from her spatial spirit tool. She poured out a round elixir from it and swallowed it. Bufang looked at Yang Meiji, and he took out a steaming hot oyster pancake from the system's storage space. He threw the oyster pancake to Yang Meiji. "Eat this. The speed at which you can recover your true energy should be faster than that elixir," Bufang said. When Yang Meiji received the oyster pancake, she was slightly taken aback. "What is this? It smells so good. Can I eat it?" Yang Meiji looked at Bufang anxiously, and she took a bite of the oyster pancake. In an instant, her eyes widened, and the depths of her eyes were filled with disbelief. It was simply too delicious. She had never eaten such a delicious thing before. After eating a mouthful of the oyster pancake, Yang Meiji couldn't stop. In just a few mouthfuls, she finished the entire oyster pancake. When she bit the plump oyster in the oyster pancake, she was so moved that she almost burst into tears. She grew up in Heavenly Mist City, and she had always eaten multi-taste fasting pills. Almost all the restaurants in Heavenly Mist City had closed down, and only her Cloud Mist restaurant was still struggling at death's door. However, the Cloud Mist restaurant didn't have a chef. How could they cook such delicious food? Thus, it had been a long time since she had eaten such a delicious food that could move people to tears. Yang Meiji ate the oyster pancake, and her big body twitched as if she was sobbing. She was extremely moved. "You should have heard what that man said before he left, right?" Bufang said as he looked at Yang Meiji, who was so touched by the food. Yang Meiji was bewildered, and her face became gloomy. "That's right. When elixir stores selling multi-taste fasting pills open around the restaurant, the Cloud Mist restaurant will become the laughingstock of the entire city." Yang Meiji was extremely bitter. She knew that she didn't have the talent to become a chef, and she relied on her faith to open this restaurant. Just as Nangong Ming had said, her talent lay in alchemy. After all, she was the disciple of the three-mark alchemist, Grandmaster Xian Bei. "Do you want the Cloud Mist restaurant to become the laughingstock of the entire city?" Bufang asked earnestly. Yang Meiji was taken aback, and her mood became somewhat agitated. "Of course not. This is my father's painstaking effort. How can I let the Cloud Mist restaurant become the laughingstock of the Heavenly Mist City? But I really can't open a restaurant in Heavenly Mist City." After Yang Meiji's excitement subsided, she was engulfed by boundless helplessness. Bufang looked around the Cloud Mist restaurant, and he was quite satisfied with it. He had always been looking for a store, and the Cloud Mist restaurant was just right for him. "I have a way to prevent the Cloud Mist restaurant from becoming the laughingstock of the Heavenly Mist City," Bufang said solemnly to Yang Meiji. "What way?" Yang Meiji's body trembled, and she asked excitedly. Bufang didn't hurry to reply. Instead, he clasped his hands behind his back and paced back and forth in the restaurant. "In the end," he said, "as long as you transfer the ownership of this Cloud Mist restaurant to me." Yang Meiji was taken aback, and a trace of anger appeared on her face. "Are you also someone who wants to occupy my Cloud Mist restaurant? Do you also want to open an elixir store? Yang Meiji will never allow it." She didn't expect that Bufang would actually have designs on the Cloud Mist restaurant, and this made her feel as though she had been deceived. However, Bufang looked at her with an odd expression on his face. "Who told you that I want to open an elixir store? I want to open a restaurant." However, I just want to be the owner of this restaurant, Bufang said calmly. The system wanted him to open a branch, so he had to be the owner of the restaurant. Thus, if Bufang wanted to help the Cloud Mist restaurant, he had to become the owner of the restaurant. Actually, this was a good thing for Yang Meiji. Bufang could see that Yang Meiji wasn't suitable to open a restaurant, since you want to open a restaurant. Alright, I agree with you. However, you have to agree to my conditions. Out of Bufang's expectations, he thought that Yang Meiji would reject him. He didn't expect that she would agree immediately. Even Bufang was dumbfounded by what he saw. Say it. What are your conditions? Asked Bufang. Yang Meiji was so excited that her entire body shook. The first condition is that the name of the restaurant will continue to be the Cloud Mist Restaurant. The second condition: if you can't save the restaurant, you have to return it to me. Bufang furrowed his brows, looking at Yang Meiji. In the end, he said, okay. However, you won't have the chance to get the restaurant back. Moreover, you will find out that the restaurant won't be able to survive. It will be the surrounding elixir stores. Chapter 420. Yang Meiji widened her eyes as she looked at Bufang. She didn't understand why Bufang was so confident. In Heavenly Mist City, it was very difficult to open a restaurant. Yang Meiji knew how difficult it was. Any kind of business would have a better future than opening a restaurant in Heavenly Mist City. Are you really that confident? Yang Meiji took a deep breath and asked one last time. Of course, if Bufang could take out a delicacy similar to the strange bun he had given her, it would be possible for him to destroy the elixir stores in the area, just like what Bufang had said. Yang Meiji was still reminiscing about the delicacy she had just tasted. It was so delicious that it intoxicated her. Even the dishes cooked by her father, the first owner of the Cloud Mist restaurant, weren't as delicious as this one. Then, it settled. From today onwards, I am the owner of this Cloud Mist restaurant. Bufang nodded, and the corners of his mouth curled up. It seemed like he was very happy. Yang Meiji seemed to have made a difficult decision. Her whole body seemed to be drained of energy. Her majestic body suddenly collapsed, lying on the ground. Her face was filled with reluctance. I hope you won't let the Cloud Mist restaurant be covered in dust. In the past, the Cloud Mist restaurant was one of the most popular restaurants in Heavenly Mist City. You won't be disappointed. Bufang was full of confidence. Congratulations to the host for purchasing the Cloud Mist restaurant and becoming its owner. Temporary mission: open a branch in Heavenly Mist City. Completed. At this moment, the solemn voice of the system resounded in Bufang's head. This voice made Bufang's mood even more cheerful. The branch has been confirmed. Within 5 days, the system will reform the Cloud Mist restaurant. Within 5 days, the host will have to come up with a new dish to increase the reputation of the Cloud Mist restaurant. The system continued to remind him. Bufang was a little bewildered. Then, a trace of happiness appeared on his face. The system wanted to reform the restaurant? This was a pleasant surprise. Since it was a branch, the facilities of the restaurant couldn't be too ordinary. It should be similar to the small restaurant in the imperial capital. Especially the equipment in the kitchen, which was the most important. While Bufang was deep in thought, Yang Meiji stood up from the ground. She looked at Bufang and said, I'm Yang Meiji, what's your name? Bufang. Bufang came back to his senses and said lightly, well, since I've handed the store over to you, I hope you won't disappoint me. Alright. I'll buy the tables and chairs for the store tomorrow, and I'll prepare the facilities for you, Yang Meiji said. I was going to the Pill Tower anyway, so I was worried about the restaurant. Now that you've bought the restaurant, I'm relieved. Yang Meiji sighed. Then, she vacated a room and brought Bufang to stay there. It was a silent night. The next day, Yang Meiji woke up early and went to buy some tables and chairs. She rearranged them in the restaurant, making the Cloud Mist restaurant look like a restaurant again. Bufang, on the other hand, wandered around in the restaurant, thinking about the new dish in his mind. Xiaopi, who was on his shoulder, seemed to have had a good sleep. Its compound eyes opened wide as it lay on Bufang's shoulder, looking around curiously. Occasionally, this little fellow would jump out and accidentally make a big hole in the door. Bufang would grab the little fellow's tail and pick it up. Otherwise, this little fellow would turn the entire restaurant upside down. When Yang Meiji came back, she saw Bufang pulling a chair and sitting at the door. His sitting posture was a little strange. It wasn't the kind of posture where he sat with his back straight. Instead, he was curled up on the chair, looking very lazy. "Why are you so free? Don't you know that there are elixir stores around here that have opened for business?" Yang Meiji thought that after Bufang bought the restaurant, he would do something soon. At the very least, he would start cooking the delicacy that she couldn't forget. However, she didn't expect that Bufang wouldn't do anything. For the past few days, he had been pulling a chair, curling up and basking in the sun. How could he be so lazy? She suddenly doubted whether handing the restaurant over to this kid was the right decision. Bufang, of course, didn't know what Yang Meiji was thinking. He nodded at her and continued to stare blankly. He was having a headache because it wasn't an easy task to develop a dish to spread the reputation of the Cloud Mist restaurant. Bufang wanted to directly cook egg-fried rice. However, although the egg-fried rice was fragrant, it wouldn't attract people's attention. Although the multi-taste fasting pill researched by the Nangong family was trash in Bufang's eyes, its fragrance wasn't weak. If he wanted to use the fragrance to suppress the other party and attract customers, it would be a little difficult and thankless. That was why Bufang was a little hesitant about what kind of dish he should research. Yang Meiji looked at the lazy Bufang and sighed. She didn't have any other choice. Handing the restaurant over to Bufang was like breaking a jar. "I'm going to the pill tower. I hope that when I come back from the pill tower, you won't destroy the restaurant." On this day, many people squeezed into the restaurant. They were all wearing the special robes of alchemists, and they were there to welcome Yang Meiji. Yang Meiji's majestic body was covered in an alchemist's robe, which made her look a little dazzling. She stared at Bufang and said solemnly. Bufang nodded and waved his hand, telling her not to worry. However, Yang Meiji was still a little worried. She was really worried about Bufang's current state. Yang Meiji left the Cloud Mist restaurant under the escort of a group of alchemists. She seemed to have regained her glory as an alchemist. Bufang watched her leave. He curled up in his chair and yawned lazily. Opposite the restaurant, a store was also opened. While Bufang was curled up in his chair, he carefully observed the elixir store. He discovered that the owner of the elixir store wasn't Nangong Ming, who came looking for trouble a few days ago. Instead, it was a red-haired woman with a voluptuous figure. The woman was wearing a veil, so her face couldn't be seen clearly. However, her voluptuous figure was very eye-catching. Although the elixir store had just opened for business, an endless stream of people came in and out. The business was booming. The booming business of the opposite store also caused the business in front of the Cloud Mist restaurant to flourish. Suddenly, the flow of people increased. However, the Cloud Mist restaurant was still deserted. When the customers, who were attracted by the elixir store, passed by the Cloud Mist restaurant, a trace of a playful expression appeared on their faces. "Oh, there is actually a restaurant in our Heavenly Mist City? Didn't they say that all the restaurants in Heavenly Mist City closed down? What the hell is this? Tisk tsk tsk. It's really pitiful. There isn't even a single person in the restaurant. This business is really pitiful." When the pedestrians passed by the entrance, they pointed at the restaurant and cast mocking gazes at Bufang, who was sitting at the entrance. The line of customers from the elixir store even reached the entrance of the Cloud Mist restaurant. They even brought chairs from the store and sat down. Bufang curled up the corners of his mouth. He was too lazy to stop them. When Bufang saw the line of customers that reached the entrance of the store, he couldn't help but squint his eyes. When Bufang saw this group of shameless people, he finally decided on the dish he wanted to cook. This dish would definitely attract the attention of these people. As he curled up on the chair, the corners of Bufang's mouth curled up, revealing a playful smile. His gaze fell on the elixir store across from him. Inside the store, a red-haired woman with a voluptuous figure was unceasingly passing elixirs to customers. As if she sensed Bufang's gaze, the woman raised her head. Her line of sight collided with Bufang's. The woman was startled. She nodded at Bufang and continued to focus on her work. "Her eyes are pretty," Bufang inwardly exclaimed in admiration. Xiao Yenyu and Ni Yen were both outrageously beautiful women. Their eyes were also very beautiful, somewhat similar to the eyes of that woman just now. Perhaps this was the common trait of beautiful women. "Boss, lend me a chair." While Bufang was in a daze, a man pulled a chair over and sat beside Bufang. He said to Bufang. The man's eyes were filled with passion as he looked at the woman in the elixir store. Saliva seemed to be dripping from his mouth. "Host, please note that the renovation of the Cloud Mist restaurant is complete. The kitchen facilities have been modified. We will now begin to replace the tables and chairs in the store." At this moment, the solemn voice of the system resounded in Bufang's mind. Hearing this voice, Bufang's eyes slightly lit up. Finally, the renovation was completed. The corners of Bufang's mouth curled up. He looked at the love-struck man beside him. Bufang stood up. He patted the man's shoulder and calmly said, "Stand up and return the chair. Today's business hours are over." The love-struck man was taken aback. He looked at Bufang with a puzzled expression. All of a sudden, he felt a friction coming from his buttocks. The chair was actually pulled out by Bufang. With a loud bang, the man fell on his buttocks. His complexion was somewhat distorted. At this moment, Bufang had already pulled the chair back into the store. The man stood up and angrily looked in the direction of Bufang. Bang! With a loud bang, the store's metal door was coldly and mercilessly shut, blocking the man's indignant and sorrowful gaze. The people in the long queue all looked at the man with strange gazes. Their gazes seemed to be filled with ridicule and amusement. The love-struck man felt his face turning red. He glanced at the store with hatred and gloomily left. As for Bufang, the corners of his mouth curled up. He looked at the store that was gradually emitting rays of light. The system's renovation was finally completed. The store was finally going to open for business. Chapter 421. After the love-struck man left, the woman in charge of the elixir store across the street seemed to have noticed this scene. She suspiciously looked at the tightly shut metal doors of the Cloud Mist restaurant. The closing time of the restaurant seems to have come earlier today. The woman couldn't help but think. All of a sudden, her eyes shrank. In her line of sight, a resplendent radiance suddenly gushed out from the tightly shut doors of the store. "What is going on inside the store?" The woman blinked her eyes. Curiosity suddenly welled up in her heart. Bufang was slightly astonished. This was the first time he saw the system renovating the store. In front of him, the entire store seemed to have brightened up. A resplendent radiance burst forth from within. The walls of the store were all lit up with incandescent radiance. The radiance was extremely dazzling. Bufang couldn't help but slightly squint his eyes. A rumbling sound reverberated in his ears. It seemed to be the sound of tables and chairs colliding with each other. Bufang looked at the various flickering shadows within the store. It was as if a whirlwind was sweeping through the interior of the store. The wind blew gently, snapping the velvet rope that tied Bufang's hair. His head of black hair hung loosely over his shoulders. It was rather elegant. After a long while, the radiance within the store gradually dissipated. Thereafter, a brand new appearance appeared in front of Bufang. Looking at the brand new store, Bufang's eyes lit up in an instant. The area of the store didn't change much. However, the style of the decorations was exactly the same as Fong Fong's little store in the Light Wind Imperial City. One could even say that it was more artistic. At the corner of the wall there was also a 5-stripes path understanding tree. This path understanding tree emitted a wave of spirit energy that made one's mind clear. As Bufang stood in the store, he actually felt as if he had returned to the store in the Light Wind Imperial City. On the menu at the back of the store, the dishes displayed had undergone a huge change. Once again, there were only 3 dishes on the menu. One was egg fried rice, 10 crystals per serving. One was sweet and sour ribs, 50 crystals per serving. One was the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, which cost 10,000 crystals each. Compared to the densely packed menu in the Light Wind Imperial City, the dishes in the Cloud Mist restaurant were much rarer. However, they were all premium dishes. Egg fried rice, sweet and sour ribs, and Buddha jumps over the wall soup were the most classic dishes in Fong Fong's little store. It was just that Bufang didn't expect that there would be 3 basic dishes. It would be amazing in the future. Looking at the menu, Bufang suddenly had an idea. He strode toward the direction of the kitchen and directly entered it. There was only a stove in the kitchen, which belonged to him. As for the other things, they were no different from the ones in the store in the Light Wind Imperial City. The tools are all the same. As expected, the system was not creative at all. The kitchen did not change at all. However, this was also good. Bufang raised the corner of his mouth and raised his hand to touch the cold metal stove. He couldn't help but reveal a trace of intoxication on his face. This kitchen was the kitchen he was familiar with. With a hook of his finger, Bufang hooked the kitchen knife in the knife rack on the stove into his hand. The muscles on his hand trembled, and the kitchen knife instantly spun in his palm. The knife flickered and the cold air was oppressive. With a hook of his foot, Bufang pulled open the cabinet and took out a piece of Russian cloud pork. With a turn of the knife, he started to quickly cut the pork. His knife skill had reached the limit of the meteor knife skill. When he used it, it was extremely dazzling. Cutting meat was simply a piece of cake. In just a short while, the Russian cloud pork was completely cut by Bufang. Each piece was as thin as a cicada's wing. With a horizontal sweep of the knife, he picked up the pork. Then, he pulled open the cabinet and took out a blue and white porcelain plate. He placed the pork on it. Bufang was a little happy in his heart. He tried the stove, and that familiar feeling intoxicated him. All of his movements were as smooth as the clouds and as smooth as water. Host, the renovation of the store has been completed. The business hours will start tomorrow. Host, please come up with a dish that can make the Cloud Mist restaurant famous within 3 days. Just when Bufang was rejoicing, the system's voice resounded in Bufang's mind. Bufang was startled. He rubbed his chin and sank into deep thought. He had already thought of a new dish. He had really thought about it. This dish was extremely famous in his previous life. It could be said that its name had spread all over the country, and it could even be said that it had spread all over the world. Almost everyone who had eaten it would never forget the taste of that dish. Moreover, the easiest way to achieve this dish was to attract people's attention. If there was still someone who didn't notice the Cloud Mist restaurant when this dish appeared, then there was definitely something wrong with their nose. The corners of Bufang's mouth curled up. He felt quite interested, and it seemed that this dish made him slightly eager to try it out. Bufang took out a big pile of spirit herbs from the system's dimensional storage. After picking and choosing, he chose 10 kinds of spirit herbs. He crushed these spirit herbs, squeezed out the juice, and placed it in a big bucket. He would keep it for later use. After exchanging some fermented beans from the system, he boiled the fermented beans with clean water. After that, he poured the filtered juice into the big bucket, stirring it to ferment. Bufang placed the big bucket of juice into the cabinet prepared by the system. This cabinet had the effect of compressing time. Of course, after a while, Bufang would open the cabinet and stir it. While waiting for the juice to ferment, Bufang began to process the main ingredient. He spent the whole morning making a lot of tofu. The shining white tofu emitted steam. It was warm and tender, and the fragrance made Bufang take in a deep breath. He really cherished this fragrance. After a while, he wouldn't be able to smell this fragrance anymore. The dish he chose was an exquisite dish, which was different from the dishes that Bufang had cooked in the past. In the past, Bufang's dishes were all fragrant to the extreme. However, this time, the dish he chose was extremely stinky. Since it was difficult to attract customers' attention, Bufang would go to the extreme and let them stink to their heart's content. Moreover, Bufang didn't have a good attitude toward the people who had lined up all the way to his restaurant's entrance. Since they liked to line up so much, then they should continue to line up. Once the stinky tofu was brought out, if they could continue to line up, then they would be considered formidable. At that time, Bufang wanted to see who in Heavenly Mist City wouldn't pay attention to the Cloud Mist restaurant. After putting away the tofu he had prepared, Bufang opened the cabinet. After the time-compressing effect of the cabinet, the brine in the wooden bucket had also been processed. Bufang's eyes twitched. The moment he opened the cabinet, an unpleasant stench accompanied by a wave of spirit energy gushed out. This stench wasn't very obvious, but it made Bufang smack his lip. He placed the wooden bucket on the ground. Bufang took out some green alum and sprinkled it into the bucket filled with the stinky brine. Gurgle, the pitch-black brine in the wooden bucket instantly started to boil, and a few bubbles appeared. The stench became even more intense, and it surged into Bufang's face. In an instant, Bufang's face darkened. This stench! It was so King sour. Bufang covered his nose and placed the white and tender tofu into the stinky wooden bucket. Looking at the white and tender tofu sinking into the wooden bucket, Bufang grinned. He was actually a little excited in his heart. After the tofu was soaked for about 4 hours, Bufang fished it out. The tofu that was fished out had been soaked in the brine, and it had turned a little black. The stench emitted from the tofu caused Bufang to feel dizzy. Honestly speaking, the smell of the stinky tofu was really unpleasant. However, its taste was surprisingly good. Only the stinky tofu could have two extremes. It could be said to be a weirdo in the world of dishes. Green smoke curled up from his arm, and the black turtle constellation wok appeared. After pouring the oil into the wok, he spat out a mouthful of 10,000 bestial flames. The temperature in the kitchen instantly rose. He stretched out his palm and felt the oil on the surface. When the oil temperature reached a temperature that was hot enough for his hand, Bufang then placed the tofu that had been soaked in the brine into the wok and started to fry it. Sizzle, after being fried, the stench of the stinky tofu was instantly dispersed along with the evaporation of the oil. That smell made Bufang's face turn a little bitter. Mantis Shrimp, who was lying on his back, was very excited, and its little feet were moving around. When the oil temperature in the wok reached a boiling point, the little guy excitedly jumped off Bufang's shoulder. It rotated 360 degrees in the air, and with a plop it fell into the wok. However, the moment it entered the wok, a thick stench rolled out. The little guy was stunned, and in the next moment it started to struggle in the wok. With a swing of its tail, its figure instantly leaped out of the wok. The spirit energy in its body surged, and after evaporating the oil, it immediately curled up on Bufang's shoulder. It lay there, spitting golden foam from its mouth, and didn't move an inch. If he had to use a phrase to describe his current state of mind, then, it could only be described as numb skin. Bufang chuckled. This naughty little guy was really smelly. He fished out the stinky tofu, which had been fried until it was pitch black and had a hint of burnt yellow. After draining the oil, he poured it into a bowl. He used a pair of chopsticks to poke a small hole in the middle of the fried stinky tofu, and the stench became even thicker. Bu Fong poured the seasoning on the stinky tofu, and a bowl of stinky tofu was completed. Looking at the exquisite, pitch-black stinky tofu with a hint of burnt yellow in the bowl, Bu Fong couldn't help but smack his lip. This bowl of stinky tofu was the first dish that Bu Fong planned to release in the Cloud Mist branch. He definitely wanted to give everyone in Heavenly Mist City a pleasant surprise. Since the aroma couldn't attract their attention, then he would use the stench. The surrounding elixir stores would see whether the fragrance of your multi-taste fasting pill or the stench of my stinky tofu was stronger. The corners of Bu Fong's mouth curled up. He used a pair of chopsticks to pick up a piece of stinky tofu. Xiaopi rolled its eyes, and after moving closer to Bu Fong, it once again lay on Bu Fong's shoulder, spitting golden foam from its mouth. Bu Fong glanced at Xiaopi, and with an expressionless face, he stuffed the pitch-black stinky tofu into his mouth. In the next moment, Bu Fong took a deep breath. Chapter 422. The stinky tofu was a weirdo in the world of dishes. It smelled extremely stinky, but when eaten it was extremely fragrant. It was the kind of delicacy that made people unable to stop eating it. This kind of extreme situation made the stinky tofu in his previous life become the favorite of many people. Although Bu Fong was a chef in his previous life, he rarely ate the stinky tofu because he was a clean freak. Thus, when he smelled the stinky tofu's aroma, he was somewhat reluctant to eat it. However, today, in order to make the Cloud Mist restaurant famous in the Heavenly Mist City, Bu Fong had no choice but to try the stinky tofu. The stinky tofu, which had been fried to a pitch-black color, was emitting a stinky odor. It was really unpleasant. Before it entered his mouth, Bu Fong's face darkened. It was somewhat difficult for Bu Fong to swallow it, and he almost gave up after swallowing it several times. However, when he stuffed a piece of the stinky tofu into his mouth, Bu Fong didn't reject it anymore. Perhaps it was because he was already familiar with the stinky odor. When the stinky tofu entered his mouth, he chewed on the crispy fried skin, and the creamy tofu flesh entered his mouth. Bu Fong's eyes lit up, and he couldn't help but feel incredulous as he savored the taste of the tofu in his mouth. When it was extremely stinky, it would be considered fragrant. Bu Fong's words were somewhat reasonable. As he chewed on the stinky tofu in his mouth, Bu Fong unexpectedly didn't dislike the stinky odor. This was because he could no longer feel the stinky odor of the stinky tofu in his mouth. The taste wasn't as bad as he had imagined, and it was surprisingly good. A kind of mellow fragrance, which was different from the stinky odor, burst out in his mouth. It was like a bomb that had been prepared for a long time, and if one wasn't careful, it would explode unknowingly. It was like a clear stream in the midst of the stinky odor, and it slowly seeped into one's body and mind. It made one's entire body calm down. After he threw the stinky odor to the back of his mind, he wholeheartedly experienced the rare mellow fragrance of the stinky tofu. It was a fragrance that made one unable to stop eating. Bu Fong couldn't help but nod as he ate. Xiaopi, who was lying on Bu Fong's shoulder, finally came back to her senses after spitting out golden foam. She looked at the stinky tofu in Bu Fong's hand with lingering fear. However, when it saw that Bu Fong was actually grabbing that stinky thing and stuffing it into his mouth, it was shocked. Xiaopi was completely stunned. The next day, Bu Fong got up early and washed up. After arriving at the restaurant's kitchen, Bu Fong felt very comfortable after the system's renovation. The aroma of the stinky tofu from yesterday had completely disappeared. The restaurant's air cleaning function saved Bu Fong a lot of effort. After practicing his knife skills in the kitchen for a while, Bu Fong came to the door and pulled it open with a creak. Warm sunlight shone in through the open door, dispelling the haze that had settled in the store for an entire night. Bu Fong exhaled gently, stood at the door, and looked out of the store. There were already some noises outside the shop. there was an endless stream of people. The elixir store across the street was still bustling with business. The red-haired woman with a voluptuous figure was still selling elixirs in an orderly manner. The fragrance emanating from her elixir store caused many people to reveal intoxicated expressions. A long queue had already begun to form. From the entrance of the opposite store, it actually ended in front of Bu Fong's store. Most of the people in the queue were men, and when they saw the red-haired woman in the store, their eyes were filled with adoration. It was unknown whether they were here to buy elixirs or to look at a woman. Today, the flow of people was clearly much higher than usual. In the surroundings, many elixir stores were also open for business. It wasn't just the red-haired woman's family. Many of the elixir stores in the vicinity were filled with people. There were even some elixir stores that had employees yelling and guiding people who wanted to buy elixirs. This area suddenly became lively. The crowd was surging, and the sound of people's voices echoed in the air. The air was filled with the fragrance of elixirs. When Nangong Ming said that this area had become the Nangong family's multi-taste fasting pills, he wasn't lying. This scene was indeed quite lively. Bu Fong's Cloud Mist restaurant was unexpectedly deserted in the midst of this bustling scene. There wasn't a single person in it, and it seemed somewhat out of place. Many people in the queue looked at Bu Fong, who was standing at the entrance of his store, and they couldn't help but sneer. Bu Fong expressionlessly swept his surroundings with his hands clasped behind his back. In the distance, Nangong Ming walked over with his Supreme Being youth. When he saw the dejected Bu Fong standing at the entrance of his store from afar, Nangong Ming's heart was filled with joy. "Oh? You actually dare to open your restaurant? This is such a bustling area and the flow of people is so high. Yet your restaurant doesn't even have a single customer. What's the point of opening your restaurant? Don't you feel embarrassed?" Nangong Ming sneered at Bu Fong as he walked. "That's my elixir store. Do you see it? There are so many people here. Have you ever seen so many customers in your life?" Bu Fong furrowed his brows and looked at Nangong Ming. Then, he looked in the direction that Nangong Ming was pointing at, and he saw an extremely luxuriously decorated store in the distance. It was also an elixir store. There was a long queue in front of the store and the flow of people was extremely high. However, it was still slightly inferior to the red-haired woman's elixir store opposite the Cloud Mist restaurant. "If you don't want to eat, then get lost. I'm about to start my business. Don't block the entrance," Bu Fong said calmly. Nangong Ming froze for a moment, and anger appeared on his face. "Start your business? Do you think that your lousy restaurant still has business?" Nangong Ming sneered. He pointed at the deserted store and shook his head in disdain. Bu Fong was speechless as he looked at him. In the end, he didn't bother with Nangong Ming anymore. Green smoke curled up from his hand, and a big wok appeared in his hand. "What do you want to do?" The complexion of the Supreme Being, who was standing beside Nangong Ming, changed drastically. He was extremely nervous as he looked at Bu Fong, who was holding a black wok. He was really frightened by the black wok. "Why aren't you leaving? If you don't want to leave, then just stand there. Don't blame me for not reminding you." Bu Fong was too lazy to pay attention to those two. The black turtle constellation wok floated in the air. Bu Fong opened his mouth and spouted a mouthful of golden 10,000 bestial flames. The 10,000 bestial flames entered the bottom of the wok, and it started to emit a scorching heat. The black turtle constellation wok, which was filled with oil, started to boil. Bu Fong turned around and went into the kitchen. After a short while, he came out with a big wooden barrel. A pungent odor billowed out from the wooden barrel. Nangong Ming and the Supreme Being youth were still standing in front of Bu Fong's store. They were curious as to what Bu Fong was going to do. Was he going to start his business? Was he going to cook on the spot to attract people's attention? He was too young. This kind of trick was too low-end. The Nangong family had already used the trick of refining elixirs on the spot. In order to attract customers, the Nangong family had already tried all sorts of methods. Nangong Ming crossed his arms in front of his chest. He really wanted to see what Bufang was going to do. No matter what you do, it won't change the fact that the restaurant has no business. Nangong Ming sneered. Bufang placed the wooden barrel on the ground and pinched his nose. He exhaled a mouthful of air. Although the stinky tofu was indeed delicious, however, this pungent odor was really unpleasant to the nose. The oil in the wok was boiling, and waves of heat were surging out from it. Many people in the surroundings came over curiously. They didn't know what Bufang was going to do. From the looks of it, he wasn't going to refine elixirs. Since this was a restaurant, could it be that he was going to cook? Interesting, this person was really courageous. He actually opened a restaurant in the area where the multi-taste fasting pill was sold. Restaurants were almost extinct in the Heavenly Mist City. However, this person still didn't give up. It was really moving. However, no matter how moved they were, they still wouldn't foolishly enter the restaurant. Bufang used a pair of bamboo chopsticks to pick up a pitch-black piece of stinky tofu from the wooden barrel. With an indifferent expression, he placed the piece of stinky tofu into the wok. Sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The sound of the oil bubbling in the wok rang out. The turbid yellow oil was surging, and waves of steam rose from it. It was accompanied by an extremely pungent odor. Nangong Ming, who was standing in front of the black turtle constellation wok, was the first to feel the pungent odor of the stinky tofu. In an instant, Nangong Ming's expression changed. From disdain to shock to loathing. Finally, his face turned dark green and his eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. When he smelled the stinky tofu's pungent odor, his whole body trembled. Ugh, what the hell? Was this guy crazy? What was he cooking? Why was it so stinky? Nangong Ming felt as though his whole body had been ravaged by the pungent odor, and he was dazed. He retreated several steps, covered his nose, and his whole body trembled. He looked at Bufang, who was calmly putting the pitch-black thing into the wok, and his lips trembled. This guy was crazy. He was definitely crazy. Was he planning to destroy the entire area where the multi-taste fasting pill was sold? He was actually cooking feces in such a crowded place. How perverted was this guy's mind? Nangong Ming roared in his heart. Finally, he couldn't bear the pungent odor, and he crawled away with the Supreme Being expert. He was standing in front of the black turtle constellation wok, and he was the first to be affected by the pungent odor. Nangong Ming wanted to cry, and he felt as though he was a wife who had been ravaged 1,000 times. He was filled with grief and indignation. Why did he stand in front of the wok? Was he stupid? As the pungent odor spread out, the surrounding people couldn't help but let out cries of complaint. The faces of the people who had surrounded the area to watch the show darkened, and they quickly retreated out of the Cloud Mist Restaurant's area. This pungent odor was simply murderous. Other elixir stores had fragrances that spread for 10 miles, but this one was stinking for 10 miles. The fragrances of so many multi-taste fasting pills were all disrupted by this pungent odor. This guy was really vicious. How could they buy the multi-taste fasting pills with peace of mind? Even if they bought them, how could they eat them? This guy actually dared to cook feces in front of so many people? He was simply a lunatic. What happened next made them even more dumbfounded. They saw the young man who was cooking feces take out several pieces of black and yellow stuff from the wok. He placed them in a bowl and sprinkled some seasonings on them. After that, he picked up a piece of the black and yellow stuff and stuffed it into his mouth. Their pores burst open, and their hearts trembled. They all took a deep breath, and their eyes widened in fear. This guy didn't just cook feces, he also ate feces. Chapter 423. Gulp. The stench of the stinky tofu was blown away by the wind. It swayed and lingered in the air, and it seemed as though it was real. It was so stinky that it had no friends. The group of people blocking the entrance of the Cloud Mist restaurant retreated due to the stench, and their complexions darkened. However, what shocked them even more was the young man who was standing in front of the restaurant, eating excrement. How could this be eaten? Why did the person in front of them have such a heavy taste? Even the fragrance of the multi-taste fasting pill couldn't cover this stench. This guy was definitely doing it on purpose. They watched as Bufang stuffed a piece of stinky tofu into his mouth. The moment Bufang bit into it, the oil inside the tofu seeped out. The oil was shiny, and there were even some black spots on it. Everyone's faces wrinkled in an instant. Nangong Ming, who was suffocated by the stench, hid far away. He really didn't want to go near the Cloud Mist restaurant. When he saw Bufang chewing the source of the stench with an intoxicated expression, his face twitched. How could he swallow such a thing? He was somewhat absent-minded. Did he force the restaurant too much? Did the other party decide to cook excrement in front of the restaurant to disgust everyone? The more Nangong Ming thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. When he looked at Bufang, his gaze became even more unkind. This scheming guy, however, when he smelled the stench around him, which made him want to vomit, he didn't know what to do. What could he do? This stench was really too stinky. The people who came to buy the multi-taste fasting pill all distanced themselves in disgust. For a moment, the bustling area became quiet. After smelling this stench, who would still be in the mood to eat the multi-taste fasting pill? The blackish-yellow substance in the wok was the most disgusting thing they had ever seen. Bufang acted as though he didn't notice the disgust in the eyes of the people around him. He continued to fry the stinky tofu. He chewed the stinky tofu in his mouth. Honestly speaking, the stinky tofu's taste was really good, and Bufang couldn't stop eating it. Soon, the stench became more and more intense, and it attracted the anger of the people around him. Many elixir store owners rushed out in indignation because they had lost their customers. He stood in front of Bufang's restaurant, glaring at him. They wanted Bufang to stop this uncivilized behavior immediately. Who would cook sh*t, eat sh*t in public, especially in the area where fasting pills were sold? Many of the shop owners in the surroundings were alchemists. They had cooperated with the Nangong family to sell these fasting pills. In order to cooperate, they had to pay a price. If the profits from the fasting pills couldn't cover the price they had to pay, then they would suffer a loss. Originally, because this area had just been opened up, its prospects were quite good. They were also hoping to earn more crystals, but no one had expected. There was actually a young man cooking feces. This was completely cutting off their source of income. Therefore, even if they had to endure the stench, they still had to suppress Bufang. What the f***ck is he doing? Hurry up and keep it. Stop disgusting me. How can we do business like this? How can you cook shit in front of someone else's shop? Damn it. If I lose money this time, I'll smash your stupid restaurant. f***ck your f***king restaurant. A series of curses rang out incessantly. Bufang, who was concentrating on cooking the stinky tofu, couldn't help but frown. He stopped what he was doing and looked at the alchemist closest to him. That alchemist's curses suddenly stopped. He straightened his neck and stared coldly at Bufang. I'm cooking in my own restaurant. How is that any of your business? Bufang said indifferently. You guys sell your fasting pills. I'll sell my stinky tofu. Let's coexist peacefully. Bufang's voice was still as calm as ever. But while he was calm, the surrounding people burst into an uproar. Sell? Oh my God, is this person an idiot? He's cooking sh*t to sell it? I thought he was purely trying to disgust people. Who would be retarded enough to buy sh*t to eat? Does he really think we're all idiots? The faces of the surrounding customers, who had been tormented by the stinky tofu's stench, changed, and they started to clamor. How could there be such a weirdo in this world? Such a stinky thing. Even without tasting it, one could tell that it was disgusting. Who would buy it? Cloud Mist Restaurant? How could they make such a rubbish dish? It was no wonder that there were fewer and fewer restaurants in Heavenly Mist City. Even the last restaurant had given up on itself. The curses and complaints around him didn't affect Bufang at all. He was still calmly frying the stinky tofu. He took out a bowl, poured some seasoning on it, and placed it on the table. This is my restaurant's dish, stinky tofu. A bowl costs 20 crystals. You're welcome to try it. Bufang glanced at the people around him and said calmly. The alchemists in the elixir shops were enraged, and they all glared at Bufang with malevolent expressions. When they heard Bufang's words, they all thought that there was something wrong with their ears. Although the cost of living in Heavenly Mist City was high, not to mention how much a bowl of dish could be sold for, everyone had a common understanding that a bowl of sh*t-like dish wasn't worth 20 crystals. Did he really think that everyone's crystals were like cabbages? The voices of resistance continued. Everyone was filled with righteous indignation. There were even some people who approached the restaurant, as though they wanted to personally stop Bufang. I've said it before. This stinky tofu is the Cloud Mist Restaurant's first dish. If anyone dares to take even half a step closer to me, I won't be polite. Bufang said. As soon as he finished speaking, a wisp of green smoke curled up from Bufang's hand, and a huge dragon bone kitchen knife appeared on his shoulder. When he waved the knife, it created a gust of wind, and it actually caused many people to feel pressured. Nangong Ming sneered from afar. He was delighted to see such a scene. This fellow was reckless enough to provoke the anger of the crowd, and soon, he would be torn to shreds by this group of angry people. Bufang calmly glanced at them and waved his hand. Another piece of stinky tofu was thrown into the wok, and the turbid yellow oil began to boil. You said that this is a dish you're going to sell? All of a sudden, a melodious female voice rang out. The crowd parted slightly, and a red-haired woman with a voluptuous figure leisurely walked out from the elixir shop in front of them. This woman wore a veil that covered her face, and her beautiful eyes left a deep impression on Bufang. She slowly walked over, and it seemed as though she didn't care about the stench in the air. She, who had fair skin, stood in front of the store and shot a glance at the stinky tofu. Then, she looked at Bufang and furrowed her brows. The authentic Cloud Mist Restaurant's secret recipe stinky tofu costs 20 crystals per bowl, and we're honest with you, Bufang said. Do you know that your cooking has seriously affected the elixir sales of my Nangong family in this area? Since you said that this is a dish, then I'll give it a try. If this dish is inedible, then immediately stop cooking and close the doors of your restaurant. Don't ever open for business again, or else, the consequences will be unimaginable. I, Nangong Wan, will keep my word. The red-haired woman stared at Bufang and slowly said, What if it's really an inedible dish? Although Bufang didn't know Nangong Wan, this woman who had suddenly appeared was exactly what Bufang wanted. Then, you can continue with your business. I, Nangong Wan, will definitely not have any objections. Nangong Wan waved her hand. Very good. Bufang nodded his head and picked up a bowl of stinky tofu. He waved his hand and the porcelain bowl floated toward Nangong Wan. Young Miss Nangong Wan actually agreed to eat this bowl of disgusting food? Heavens! Has young Miss Nangong Wan gone crazy? How could she agree to such a request? Don't! The perfect image of young Miss Nangong in my heart will completely collapse after eating this bowl of excrement. When the surrounding customers learned that Nangong Wan wanted to personally taste this extremely stinky dish, they all wailed in grief. They were all wailing in anguish. Some of the men were even pulling at their hair, their eyes wide open. Nangong Wan, the granddaughter of the Nangong family's great elder, was a genius who had graduated from the Alchemy Institute. She would soon pass the Pill Towers test and become an official One Cloud alchemist. She was the goddess of many men in the heavenly mist city. None of them expected that Nangong Wan would step forward. Nangong Wan caught the bowl of stinky tofu that Bufang threw at her. It was really stinky. Nangong Ming couldn't help but furrow her brows when she smelled the stinky tofu's odor at such a close distance. Honestly speaking, she was somewhat disgusted. However, since she had already promised Bufang that she would eat it, she wouldn't refuse him. Nangong Wan removed her veil and revealed a peerlessly beautiful face. Her face was so beautiful that it could suffocate people. However, no one paid attention to her face at this moment. Everyone's attention was focused on her actions. They watched as she slowly picked up a piece of stinky tofu, touched it with her rosy lips, and bit it with her pearly white teeth. Everyone's heart was in their throats. Heavens! Their goddess ate excrement. This was what everyone was thinking at this moment. However, a scene that shocked them occurred in the next moment. Their goddess ate a mouthful of it, but it wasn't enough. She took another mouthful. Heavens! Their goddess was addicted to eating excrement. It was as if a bolt of lightning had struck everyone's heart. They were so shocked that they were scorched on the outside and tender on the inside. They widened their eyes and opened their mouths as they looked at Nangong Wan eating the stinky tofu faster and faster. What was happening to this world? Some people were bewildered. The corners of Bufang's mouth curled upwards. He squinted his eyes as he watched the beautiful woman eat the stinky tofu faster and faster. The stinky tofu was considered a marvel in the world of dishes. It had its own unique charm. After eating it once, Bufang believed that many people wouldn't be able to get rid of its charm. They would be subdued by the stinky tofu and sink into its delicious taste. The extremely stinky fragrance was capricious. Nangong Wan swallowed the last piece of the stinky tofu. Her lips were rosy and filled with the alluring luster of oil. She exhaled softly, and her voluptuous figure slightly trembled. She let out a sweet moan. Her beautiful eyes seemed as if they were about to drip water as she looked at Bufang. Her rosy lips parted as she breathed heavily. Can I have another bowl? You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.